Henry Caldwell said it loud enough for the whole church hall to hear. "Put the school teacher up at the old cabin. With Dawson. Nobody wants either one of them anyway." The room laughed. Clara Bennett didn't. She stood so fast her chair cracked against the floor. "Say it again, Henry. Louder. Half my students are sitting in this room." The laughing died. And in the back, the cowboy nobody in Willow Creek trusted pushed off the wall and said 6 words that changed the town forever. "She's not going up there alone." Outside, the worst storm in 40 years was already leaning on the door. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button and stay to the very end. This story gets harder before it gets beautiful. And do me one favor, drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far Clara and Jack's story has traveled. The wind hit the church hall so hard, the windows bowed inward, and for 3 seconds, nobody in Willow Creek said anything at all. Then Pastor Whitfield brought his hand down flat on the table. "Sit down, all of you. Henry, that will be the last remark of that kind tonight." Henry Caldwell didn't sit. He was a man who had never in his life been told to sit by anyone he considered smaller than himself, and he considered most of the county smaller than himself. "I'm not the one who made the list, Pastor. I'm just the one willing to read it out loud." "Then read it," Clara said. "All of it." "Clara." That was Ruth Abbott 2 rows up, reaching back for Clara's sleeve the way a woman reaches for a kettle that's about to boil over. Clara didn't sit either. She was 27 years old, and she had stood in front of 31 children every weekday for 6 years and made them read out loud when they were terrified to. She knew exactly what it cost to keep your feet under you when a room turned on you. She'd taught it. She just had never had to do it herself in front of everyone she'd ever fed, tutored, buried, and prayed with. "Read the list, Henry." Caldwell smiled. He had a beautiful smile. That was the thing people never understood about him afterward. He was handsome, and he was generous at Christmas, and he had given the town its water pump and every terrible thing he ever did. He did with that smile on his face. The Pruitt family goes to the Hendersons. The Vances go to the mercantile loft. Widow Cassidy and her sister take the parsonage. The Kelso boys go to my bunkhouse, and Doc Bailey's people go to the Whitfields. He turned the page. "That's everybody with a roof left." "That's not everybody," Clara said. "No," Caldwell agreed pleasantly. "It isn't." The math was cruel, and it was simple, and every person in that hall did it in their head at the same time. 19 homes had lost their roofs, or their chimneys, or their whole east walls in the first night of the storm. The road out was gone. The pass was gone. The telegraph line had snapped somewhere past the Kelso place, and nobody was going to go find it in this. Willow Creek had 4 buildings with working stoves and enough wood to run them, and every one of them was already stacked with people sleeping shoulder to shoulder on floors. And there was one more building. 8 miles up the old line cabin on the north shoulder of the mountain, where the ranch hands used to winter cattle before Caldwell bought the grazing rights and stopped bothering. 1 room, 1 stove, 1 door. "There's the cabin," Caldwell said. "Dawson's already been running supplies up there. He knows the trail. Somebody's got to go, and it can't be a family, and it can't be an old-timer, and it can't be anybody with children waiting on him." He spread his hands like a man laying down a hand of cards he was sorry to be holding. "So it's the 2 folks in this valley with nobody waiting on them at all." Silence. Ruth Abbott said very quietly, "That's an ugly way to put it, Henry." "It's the true way to put it, Ruth." And that not the laughing, not the insult, that was the part that went into Clara Bennett like a nail, because nobody argued with him. 31 children's mothers sat in that hall and nobody stood up and said, "She has us. She has all of us. She has every one of our kids." They looked at the floor. They looked at their hands. Mrs. Pruitt, whose boy Sam had been failing every letter of the alphabet until Clara sat with him 3 nights a week for a year and a half for free, looked at the floor. Clara felt something in her chest go very still and very cold, and it wasn't the storm. "So that's what I am," she thought. "After 6 years, that's what I am to them." "Fine," she said. Ruth's head snapped up. "Clara, no. I said fine." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was the only miracle she got that night. "I'll take the cabin." The hall erupted. "Absolutely not," Ruth Abbott said, on her feet now. "You will not put an unmarried woman in one room with a man for 2 months. Are you people out of your minds? Do you hear yourselves? Then you take her, Ruth," someone called out. "I've got 11 people in a 4-room house, and my husband's mother is dying in the front bedroom. And you know it, Ansel Vance. So don't you dare. Then don't lecture. It's her reputation. It's her life," Doc Bailey snapped, and the hall went quiet again, because Doc Bailey never raised his voice ever. He was 71, and he had delivered half the room. "You want to talk about reputation? I've got 4 cases of frostbite and 1 of pneumonia, and it's night 2. Night 2. This thing's going to sit on us 6-8 weeks. You want to be delicate about Miss Bennett's reputation while she freezes in a schoolhouse with no chimney. I'll write it on the death certificate for you. Cause of death, what people might say." Nobody had an answer to that. Doc Bailey sat back down and put his hat on his knee and stared straight ahead. And Clara would remember for the rest of her life that he was the only one who fought for her. Him. And the man in the back who hadn't said another word. Jack Dawson had come down off the mountain at 3 that afternoon with a mule and 80 pounds of flour and a bad feeling. And he had planned on saying nothing at all. That was the whole plan. It had been the plan for 6 years. Say nothing. Do the work. Let them think whatever they were going to think, because they were going to think it regardless, and every word out of your mouth was just something else they could turn around and use. He was 35. He had been in Willow Creek 4 years. In 4 years, he had built more fence, pulled more calves, and dug more graves than any man in the valley. And there were still mothers who took their kids by the hand and crossed to the other side of the street when he came out of the mercantile. He knew what they said. Ran him out of 2 rivers, you know. Something with a girl. Something they couldn't prove. He'd stopped hearing it years ago. That was a lie he told himself. You never stop hearing it. You just stop showing that you heard. But when Caldwell said nobody wants either one of them anyway, and that room laughed, Jack watched the schoolteacher stand up. He watched her chin come up and her hands shake and her voice not shake at all. And he watched every friend she had in that room find something fascinating to look at on the floorboards, and something in him came loose that he had bolted down a long time ago. He didn't decide to speak. He just heard himself doing it. She's not going up there alone. "Well," Caldwell said, "there it is." Jack came up the center aisle. He didn't hurry. He never hurried. It was one of the things people found unsettling about him. "That's not what I said." "It's what everybody heard. Then everybody's got wax in their ears." Jack stopped at the front and turned around, and it was the first time most of that room had ever seen his face straight on and lit. That trail's 8 miles, and it climbs 1,100 feet, and there's 2 places it goes to nothing but a ledge. She's never ridden it. In this, she'd be dead by the second creek, and you'd all sit here feeling terrible about it for about a week. "So you'll escort her up and come back down," Caldwell said. "Very gallant." "Come back down to what, Henry?" Jack's voice didn't rise. It just got flatter, and somehow that was worse. "You've got my bunk. You put the Kelso boys in it 2 hours ago. I heard you read it off the list." The smile flickered, just for a half second. Clara saw it. She was watching Caldwell's face because she'd been watching that face her entire adult life, and she saw the flicker. He knew she thought. He knew before he read the list. He knew where Jack was sleeping tonight, because he's the one who took the bed. "There's a stove up there," Jack went on. "There's a stack of wood I cut myself in September, and there's a partition wall and a curtain rod, and I'll hang a blanket, and I'll sleep on the floor side, and Miss Bennett can bar the door from the inside with the drop bar. And if that's not enough for you people, then I'll build a second wall out of split rail because Lord knows I'll have the time." He looked out at them. "You want to sit here and decide what kind of man I am? Go ahead. You've had 4 years. But she's not walking up that mountain by herself, and she's not sitting in a schoolhouse with no chimney. And if one of you wants to volunteer your own front room instead, now'd be the time." He waited. He actually waited. He stood there and gave them a full 10 seconds, and Clara counted every one of them, and afterward, she could not have told you which was heavier, the silence, or the fact that Jack Dawson had clearly known exactly how it was going to end. Nobody moved. "That's what I thought," Jack said. Outside, the wind was doing something Clara had never heard wind do, a low sound more like weight than noise, like something enormous leaning against the whole town. Ruth caught her by both arms in the vestibule. "Clara Bennett, you listen to me. Once you get on that horse, that's it. There is no undoing this. You understand? Come spring, you won't be the teacher anymore. You'll be the woman who spent the winter in a cabin with Jack Dawson. That's your name now. That's your name for the rest of your life in this valley." "I know. You do not know. You're 27 and you think you know." "Ruth?" Clara took her friend's hands off her arms gently and held them. "I've been the woman nobody wanted since I was 22 years old, 6 years. Do you know what changed tonight?" "Clara, nothing." Clara said, "Nothing changed tonight. They just said it out loud." Ruth's face came apart. "That's not true. Honey, that's not true. You were the only one who stood up. You and Doc." Clara squeezed her hands and let them go. "So don't tell me about my name. My name's been theirs to write since Daniel died. I've just been the last one to figure it out." Sam Pruitt caught her at the door. He was 9 years old, and he had his coat on wrong one arm through the wrong sleeve, and he had clearly slipped away from his mother, and he stood in front of Clara Bennett with his whole face working like a boy trying to hold a wall up. "Miss Bennett?" "Sam, get back to your mother, sweetheart. Are you bad now?" Clara stopped. The wind kept on outside. Somewhere behind her, 40 adults were putting on their coats and not looking at her. She went down on one knee. "Say that again." "Mama said..." His chin went. "Mama said we're not supposed to talk about you when you come back. She said we're not supposed to say anything at all, and I said why, and she said, 'Cause you're going up the mountain with the cowboy. And now she said it's different now." His voice cracked all the way through. "Are you bad now? Did you do something bad?" And Clara Bennett, who had held it together through Henry Caldwell, and through the laughing, and through Ruth, and through the whole hall, looking at the floor. Clara Bennett felt her eyes go hot and had to look at the wall for a second. "No," she said. "No, Sam, I didn't do anything bad." "Then why?" "Because sometimes people decide a thing about you and it's not true, and they decide it anyway." She took his coat and pulled his arm out of the wrong sleeve and put it through the right one and did the buttons one at a time the way she'd done 1,000 times. "You know what you do about that." He shook his head. "You keep on being who you are anyway," Clara said. "Even when it doesn't work. Especially when it doesn't work." "That's a dumb answer." She laughed one broken little laugh she didn't mean to let out. "Yeah," she said. "It is. It's the only true one I've got." Sam threw both arms around her neck so hard, he nearly knocked her over. And behind them, Mrs. Pruitt said, "Samuel," in a voice like a slammed door, and the boy let go and was gone. Clara stayed on her knee a second longer than she needed to. When she stood up, Jack Dawson was standing 6 feet away, holding 2 horses' worth of tack, and looking at absolutely nothing. "How much of that did you hear?" she said. "All of it." "Wonderful. Miss Bennett." He shifted the saddle blanket to his other arm. "You can still say no. I'll take you to Doc's, and I'll sleep in the livery, and if I lose some fingers, I lose some fingers. I've got 8, I don't use much." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Is that a joke?" "Little bit." "It's a terrible joke." "Yes, ma'am." "Mr. Dawson?" She pulled her gloves on. "I have spent 6 years having decisions made about me by people who never once asked me a question. Tonight, a man read my name off a list like I was a crate of nails, And you're the first person in this entire town who said the words "you can say no" out loud to me. Jack didn't answer. So, no, Clara said. I'm not staying. Let's go before it gets worse. It got worse. 8 miles took them 5 hours and 40 minutes. They did not speak for the first 2. Clara couldn't have if she'd wanted to. The cold went past her coat and past her skin and got into her teeth, and she spent most of the second hour with her jaw locked so hard she thought it would crack. Jack rode ahead and to the left, always to the left, and it took her 3 miles to understand that he was putting his horse between her and the drop. At the second creek, the mare balked, and Clara's hands were too dead to hold the reins, and she actually slid sideways out of the saddle, and Jack was there before she knew he'd moved, one hand fisted in her coat, hauling her back up by main strength. Don't. I didn't. Don't apologize. He got her boot back in the stirrup. His face was 2 inches from hers, and she saw the ice in his eyebrows and the scar under his jaw. You're not falling off. You're freezing. There's a difference, and you need to know it. When you can't feel your hands, tell me. Don't be brave about it. Brave gets you killed up here. Is that what you tell the cattle? He looked at her, and then barely just at one corner, Jack Dawson smiled. Cattle don't sass me, he said, and turned his horse. The cabin was one room exactly as advertised. There was a stove and a plank table and 2 bunks against opposite walls and a rope strung between them with a horse blanket over it, which Jack had clearly hung sometime in the last 5 hours before he came down the mountain, and Clara stood in the doorway and understood something that made her stomach turn over. You knew. Jack was on his knees at the stove. Ma'am, you hung that blanket before the meeting. You knew before you walked into that hall. I hung it because I figured somebody'd end up here. He didn't look up. The kindling caught. Didn't know it'd be you. Who did you think it'd be? Me, Jack said. Just me. Same as every winter. The first 3 days they built a country. That's what Clara wrote in the margin of her gradebook weeks later, when she finally had feeling in her fingers again. And something to say, we built a country with laws. The laws were, he was outside from first light until the wood was done. She was inside. He knocked before he came in every time, even the 15th time in a day, even when the wind was tearing the sound of his knuckles off the door before she could hear it. She cooked. He never once came to the stove while she was at it. The blanket stayed on the rope. He slept on the floor side of it on a bedroll with his boots on for 11 straight nights before she noticed. They didn't talk. They reported. Wood stacked. There's beans. Thank you. There's a bar on the door. Use it. I know. Just saying. I know. 4 days of that. 5. On the 6th day, Clara Bennett, who had spent 6 years alone in a 2-room house and thought she knew what quiet was, realized she was going to lose her mind. It broke on the 7th night, and it broke over beans. She'd burned them, badly. She'd been thinking about Sam Pruitt's face, and she'd let the pot sit, and the bottom third went to carbon, and when Jack came in and knocked snow off his hat and sat down, she put the plate in front of him with her hands shaking. He ate 3 bites. It's burned, Clara said. It's fine. It's burned, Mr. Dawson. I can smell it from here. You don't have to. Miss Bennett? He set the fork down. I've eaten worse than this off a fire I built with wet sage in the rain in Wyoming in '79. This is a feast. This is a banquet. He picked the fork back up. Also, I'm not going to tell you it's burned, because then you'd feel bad, and then we'd both sit here feeling bad, and there's nowhere in this room to go feel bad separately. That's the whole situation. That's the arithmetic of the room. Clara stared at him, and then she laughed. It came out of her like something breaking, one loud, ugly, undignified laugh, and then another, and then she had her hand over her mouth and her eyes were streaming and she could not stop, and Jack Dawson sat there with a fork full of burned beans and watched her come apart at his table with an expression she couldn't read at all. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm sorry, it's not funny. It's a little funny." The arithmetic of the room. That's what it is. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. 7 days, she said. 7 days, and that's the most words you've said in a row. Probably. Why? Jack chewed, swallowed, looked at the stove. Habit, he said. She asked him on the 9th night. She'd been building up to it for 2 days, and it came out worse than she'd planned, the way those things always do. "Why don't you defend yourself?" He was greasing a strap. His hands didn't stop. "Ma'am," in the hall. "Henry Caldwell said your name like it was a disease, and half that room laughed and you stood there. You could have flattened him. Physically, I mean you could have. Everyone in that room knew you could have. And you didn't say one word about yourself. You only spoke when it was about me." Clara set her book down. Why? The strap went through his hands over and over. "Because sometimes people don't want the truth," Jack said. "They just want a story that makes them feel right about what they already did." The fire popped. "That's a very sad thing to believe," Clara said. "It's a very useful thing to believe." "That's not the same as true." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He set the strap down and finally looked at her, and Clara saw it, the thing under the quiet, the thing she'd been mistaking for coldness for 4 years, like everybody else in that valley. It wasn't cold at all. It was a man holding a door shut from the inside with his shoulder, and had been for so long that he'd forgotten there was anything behind it but weight. "2 rivers," she said. His face closed. Just like that, like a hand over a lamp. "Miss Bennet." "They say there was a girl." "Miss Bennet?" "They say it couldn't be proved." "Miss Bennet." The word came out of him with an edge she'd never heard, and Clara Bennet, who had faced down Henry Caldwell and a laughing church hall without blinking, flinched. And Jack saw her flinch. She watched what that did to him. She watched it land in his face and go all the way down, and it was the single worst thing she'd seen in her whole life. Worse than Caldwell. Worse than the floor starers. And she opened her mouth to fix it, and there was nothing to fix it with. Jack stood up. Very carefully. He put his hat on. "Wood's low," he said. "Jack." He went out into the storm at 9 o'clock at night, with no reason on God's earth to be out there, and he shut the door soft behind him, and Clara sat alone in a one-room cabin, with the beans and the fire, and her own voice going around and around in her head. "They say there was a girl. They say." She put her face in her hands. "Oh, you fool," she whispered. "You absolute fool. You did it to him. You did the exact thing they do to you, and you did it in 9 days." He was gone 40 minutes. She had the door barred and unbarred it twice, and was reaching for her coat the 3rd time when she heard the knock, that same steady knock 3 times like nothing had happened, like it was the 15th time that day. She threw the door open. He was carrying 4 sticks of wood. 4. He had been out in that for 40 minutes, and he had 4 sticks of wood, and Clara understood that he hadn't gone out for wood at all. He'd gone out because there was nowhere in that room to go. "Get in here." "I'm fine." "Get in here, Jack Dawson." He got in. She got the wood out of his arms and dropped it and got his gloves off, and then she stopped because his hands were the wrong color. Not red, not even white. A kind of gray-yellow, and the tips of 2 fingers on the right hand had gone hard and waxy, and Clara had grown up in these mountains, and she knew exactly what she was looking at. "Sit down." "It's nothing, it's—" "Sit down." He sat down. She got the pan of water off the stove and got it to the temperature Doc Bailey had drilled into every woman in that valley. Warm, not hot, and never near the fire. And she put Jack Dawson's hands into it, and she held them there. He hissed through his teeth. "That's the blood coming back," she said. "It's going to get worse before it stops. Don't pull away." "I know what it is." "Then don't pull away." He didn't. They sat like that for a long time, her hands around his hands in the water. both of them looking anywhere but at each other, and the storm came down on that cabin like the end of the world. "I shouldn't have asked," Clara said. "You can ask." "No, I shouldn't have said they say." Her thumbs moved over his knuckles, working the blood back the way Doc had taught her. That's the whole thing, isn't it? That's the whole rotten thing, they say. Nobody ever has to be responsible for they say." She swallowed. "That's what they did to me for 6 years, and I picked it up and used it on you inside of 9 days. I'm ashamed of myself." Jack was quiet. "You want to know," he said. "I want to know because I want to know you, not because I want the story." She looked up. "There's a difference, and I should have known it. I of all people should have known it." He looked at her hands around his hands. "There was a girl," Jack said. Clara didn't move. "Her name was Ellie Marsh. She was 19, and she worked at her daddy's hotel in Two Rivers, and she was the only person in that town who ever said good morning to me like she meant it." His voice had no color in it at all. "And one night in November of '81, somebody put her in the river. Jack, they found her Sunday. They arrested me Monday." He said it like reading a fence line. "Held me 11 days. Turned me loose because there was nothing. No witness, no reason, nothing but me being the last man seen walking the road she walked, and me being from someplace else. They let you go. They let me go." Jack's mouth did something that wasn't a smile. "That's the part nobody understands. If they'd have hung me, it'd be over. Instead, they turned me loose, and every one of them got to go on believing whatever they wanted for the rest of their natural lives, and I got to carry it into every town I ever walk into after that forever, and there's no court on earth that can unsay it." He took a breath. "You asked why I don't defend myself. Miss Bennett, I defended myself for 11 days in a room with no window. Didn't do a thing. So no. I don't argue anymore. I just do the work and let 'em watch." Clara's throat had closed. "Did they ever find who?" "No." "Do you know who?" And Jack Dawson said nothing. That was the thing. That was the moment. Clara Bennett would go back over it 100 times in the months to come, and she would always come back to this. He didn't say no. He said nothing, and there is a canyon between those two words, and she was too green and too shaken to see the bottom of it that night. "Jack," she said, "do you know who—" He took his hands out of the water. "Water's cold," he said. "Tumber." 2 nights later, somebody knocked on the door of a cabin 8 miles up a mountain in the middle of the worst storm in 40 years. Clara was up before she was awake. Jack was already standing, and he had the rifle off the pegs, and Clara had never once seen him touch it. "Get behind the blanket." "Jack." "Behind the blanket, Clara." It was the first time he had ever used her name. She got behind the blanket. The knock came again. Not a traveler's knock, not a man dying in the snow, but 3 flat raps unhurried the knock of a man who is not the least bit cold, because he has not come very far. Jack opened the door 6 inches. "Bo." "Evenin', Dawson." Clara knew the voice. Bo Turner, Caldwell's foreman. "Cold one." 8 miles of cold one. What do you want?" "Mr. Caldwell sent me up to check on the schoolteacher's welfare." "At midnight." "Well, he's a conscientious man." Behind the blanket, Clara stopped breathing. "She's asleep," Jack said. "She's fed, and she's warm, and she's got a bar on that door, and I sleep on the floor. You can tell him that. You can tell him I said it slow if he needs it slow. He'd rather hear it from her. Then he can ride up in April." There was a pause, and in that pause Clara Bennett understood with a clarity that made her sick that this man had ridden 8 miles up a mountain at midnight in a killing storm for one reason and one reason only, so that he could go back down and tell 40 people in a church hall that he had personally seen with his own eyes what was going on in that cabin. Whatever he decided he'd seen. Caldwell hadn't sent him to check on her. He'd sent him to witness. Dawson. Turner's voice changed. Dropped. Got friendly, which was worse. "Between us, Mr. Caldwell wanted me to say there's no hard feelings about the hall. He knows how it looked. And come spring, if a man wanted to move on quiet, no trouble, Mr. Caldwell would see he had a good horse and 2 months' wages and a letter for wherever he was headed. A beat. And the school teacher keeps her school. That's the part he wanted me to say twice. She keeps her school. Clara's hands went to her mouth. Jack didn't say anything for a long moment. Say the rest of it, he said. That's all of it. No, it isn't. Say the rest, Beau. Turner sighed, and when he spoke again, there was something almost like pity in it. And if a man doesn't move on, he said, Mr. Caldwell's not sure the school board's going to have the stomach to renew a teacher who wintered with him. That's all. That's just arithmetic, nothing personal in it. The arithmetic of the room, Clara thought wildly and put her fist against her teeth. Get off my mountain, Jack said. It ain't your mountain, Jack. Turner was already walking. That's kind of the point. The door shut. The bar came down. Clara came out from behind the blanket, and she was shaking, and it was not the cold. He'd already decided, she said. Before the meeting. He put my name on that list on purpose. Yes. He knew the Kelso boys were in your bunk. He put them there. He put them there so you'd have nowhere, yes, so that he could, her voice went. She got it back. So that he could stand up in front of my whole town and make me choose between freezing and being ruined. And either way, he gets you out of this valley and me out of that school, and everybody in that hall would sit there and let him do it because he'd make it look like weather, like it was nobody's fault, like it was just snow. Jack hung the rifle back on the pegs. Yes, he said. Clara stood in the middle of that one room and heard 6 years of her life rearrange themselves. Why? She whispered. Why does he want you gone? You've never done a thing to him. You've worked for half this valley. You've never taken a dollar of his. And Jack Dawson stood with his back to her and his hands flat on the wall, and Clara watched his shoulders rise and fall once. Jack, why does Henry Caldwell want you out of this valley? He turned around, and she saw his face, and it was not the closed door anymore. It was not the quiet man who let them watch. It was something she had never seen on him, not once in 4 years of crossing the street from him, like everybody else, and it took her a second to name it because she'd never expected to see it on him. It was fear. Miss Bennett, Jack said, what was Henry Caldwell's business before he came to Willow Creek? I don't cattle. He had cattle interests. Up north somewhere he came in 82. Everybody knows he... She stopped. The fire popped. 82. Where? Clara said. Her lips had gone numb. Where up north? Jack looked at her for a long moment. He owned a hotel, he said. The word sat in that room like a stone dropped in a well. A hotel, Clara said. The Marsh House, on the corner of 3rd and the River Road in Two Rivers, Montana. Jack didn't move from the wall. 11 rooms and a dining hall. Ellie's grandfather built it. Her daddy ran it 40 years and drank most of it away, and in the spring of '81, he sold 60% of it to a man from Denver with clean boots and a beautiful smile. Clara sat down. She didn't decide to. Her legs just quit. No. Yes. Jack, that's not. There are 1,000 hotels. There's one Henry Caldwell. He turned around finally. You want to argue me out of it? Go ahead. I've argued myself out of it about 400 times sitting right in this cabin for 4 years. Then I go down to the Mercantile and I see him buy licorice for the Vance children and pat him on the head, and I argue myself right back in. But you don't know. No, Jack said. I don't know. That's the whole disease of it, Clara. I don't know. I've never known. I've got no proof, no witness, no paper, nothing but 11 days in a room with no window, and a man who was standing in the lobby of that hotel the night she died, and who was in Denver by the funeral, and in this valley by the following summer, with money he did not have in the spring. He let out a breath. That's not knowing. That's just a shape. Then why? She stopped because her voice was climbing and there was nowhere in that room to take it. She started again, quieter. Why did they arrest you and not him? Jack looked at her with something that was almost gentleness, which was somehow the worst thing yet. Because he had 60% of a hotel, he said, and I had a bedroll. Clara had no answer to that. There wasn't one. There had never been one in the history of the world, and every person in that valley knew it, and not one of them would have said it out loud. "Tell me all of it," she said. "Miss Bennet, you said I could ask." "I said you could ask. Didn't say you'd want what you got." "Jack!" She put both hands flat on the table. "There is a man 8 miles down this mountain who read my name off a list tonight, like I was a crate of nails, and 2 nights ago, he sent his foreman up here at midnight to look at me and go tell my town what he decided he saw. He is going to take my school. He is going to take your name again a second time in a second valley, and he is going to do it with everybody's blessing." Her voice cracked, and she let it. "So don't you tell me I won't want it. I already have it. It's already mine. I just don't know what it is yet." The fire popped. Jack sat down across from her, and he talked for 2 hours, and Clara Bennet did not say one word the entire time. Ellie Marsh had been 19, and she had run that hotel, actually run it since she was 15, because her father couldn't run a comb through his hair after 10 in the morning. She did the books. She hired the girls. She knew what every room brought in, and what every sack of flour cost. And when Henry Caldwell bought his 60%, she stayed on because it was her grandfather's building, and she'd have swept it with her hands if she had to. In September of '81, she started asking questions about the books. What questions? I don't know. Jack turned his cup a quarter turn. "That's the truth, and I've hated it for 5 years. She never told me. She said, I want to be sure first, Jack, because if I'm wrong, I've called a man a thief in his own house." He almost laughed. It didn't come out right. That was Ellie all over. Wouldn't say a thing till she was sure. And I said, "Well, when'll you be sure?" And she said Friday. Clara felt the floor of her stomach go. "She died Thursday," she said. "She died Thursday night." Neither of them said anything for a while. They found her Sunday morning 2 miles down in the shallows past the mill. Doc there said she'd been in the water since Thursday. And on Monday the deputy came for me because I was seen on the river road Thursday night, which I was because she'd asked me to meet her at the back of the hotel at 9 o'clock, and she never came out. And I stood in that alley in the cold like a fool for 2 hours, and then I went back to the bunkhouse and slept. His jaw worked. That's it. That's my whole alibi. I waited for her, and then I gave up and went to bed. 11 days they asked me that same question 40 different ways, and every time I answered it, it sounded worse. Jack? You know what they wanted? He looked up. They didn't want the truth. They wanted the story to have a shape a person could live with. A drifter and a pretty girl and a river, that's a shape. Folks can put that on a shelf and go to church. But the man who bought the hotel and the girl who was reading the books, nobody wanted that shape. That one doesn't sit on a shelf. That one means you shook his hand at the bank. Clara's eyes had filled, and she was too angry to be embarrassed about it. Did you tell them about the books? Day 1, day 2, day 6. Jack's voice was flat as slate. Sheriff wrote it down. I watched him write it down. And then he set his pencil in the fold, and he said, I remember every word of this. Clara, I'll remember it when I'm dying, he said. Son, you're accusing the only man in this town who ever paid his taxes early. Clara put her hand over her mouth, and then he said, Now where were you Thursday night? The wind leaned on the cabin, and the whole thing groaned around them. They turned you loose. 11 days. Nothing to hold me on. Nothing to clear me with either. That's the trick of it. That's the trap nobody understands unless they've been in it. They didn't find me innocent. They just quit. He spread his hands. 2 fingers on the right were still waxy at the tips, and Clara saw them and hated everything. They walked me out the door at 7 in the morning, and the whole street was there. Nobody said a word. Somebody's mother crossed to the other side, and I had to walk the length of that street to get my horse. How long was the street? Clara whispered. Jack looked at her surprised. Of all the questions. 200 yards, he said. And how long did it take you? He was quiet for a moment. I'm still walking it, Jack said. Clara Bennet put her head down on her arms on that plank table and cried like she hadn't cried since she was 22 years old. And Jack Dawson sat 6 feet away and did not touch her. And after a long while, he got up and put another stick in the stove, because it was the only thing in the world he had to give. That was the 9th night. They didn't speak of it for 6 days after, and those 6 days were the strangest of Clara's life, because they were happy. That was what she couldn't reconcile. She had a dead girl in her head, and a man circling her school like weather, and 8 miles of snow between her and everything she'd ever built, and she was happy in a one-room cabin eating burned beans. It started with the books. She'd brought 3 crates of them, because when a woman is told to pack for 8 weeks, she packs what she cannot survive without, and Clara Bennett had packed a hairbrush, 4 dresses, and 110 school books. Jack had looked at the crates in the barn on the 2nd day and said nothing at all, which she later learned was Jack Dawson laughing. On day 11, she found him at the table with her McGuffey 4th reader, the one with the spine gone and a needle and a length of waxed thread. "What are you doing?" He didn't jump. He never jumped. "Spine's out. It's just stitched wrong. Somebody restitched it who didn't know how." "That was me." "I know," Jack said. Clara stood there with her mouth open. "How do you know how to bind a book?" "Same as a saddle. It is just leather and thread and knowing which way the strain runs." He pulled the thread through easy even. "The children are going to want their reader in April." And Clara had to go stand by the stove with her back to him for a minute. She caught him at it the next night. He was doing it again, another book, and his lips were moving. She watched for a full minute before she understood. He wasn't checking the stitching. He was reading the page. Slow, word at a time. A grown man of 35, with his mouth shaping the fox, ran to the, and when he felt her looking, he shut the book like she'd walked in on him bathing. "Jack? Don't." "I wasn't going to. You were going to be kind about it." He set the book down. "Miss Bennett, I'd rather you laughed." "I'm not going to laugh." "Then don't do the other thing either." Clara came and sat down across from him and folded her hands. "How much?" she said. "Ma'am, how much can you read?" "Don't tell me none. I've watched you read a brand book and a feed bill." Jack's jaw set. She waited. She was very, very good at waiting. She had 31 children. "Enough," he said finally. "Enough to not get cheated. Signs, numbers, short things. If it's long..." His hand made a motion, a kind of scattering. "It gets away from me. The letters don't hold still. I get to the bottom of it, and I've lost the top." "Who taught you?" "Nobody. Went to school till I was 8. Then my daddy died, and I went to work, and that was the end of school." He said it without any self-pity at all, which was somehow unbearable. "I taught myself the rest off feed sacks and wanted posters." "Wanted posters?" "Well, they're written plain," Jack said. "That's the one nice thing about 'em." Clara laughed, and then she stopped laughing because she had just done the arithmetic, and it made her sick. "Jack, in 2 Rivers, when they held you 11 days. She heard her own voice go thin. "Did they give you anything to sign?" He went absolutely still, and Clara Bennett saw the whole thing in his face, all of it in 1 second, and she wished to God she hadn't asked. "Day 9, Jack said. "Sheriff put a paper in front of me, said it was a statement of my whereabouts, said sign it and go home." "Did you sign it?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I couldn't read it," Jack said, and I wasn't about to tell him that. Clara's hands were shaking. "So you sat 2 more days." "I sat 2 more days. And on the 11th they let me out anyway." He looked at his own hands on the table. "I've thought about that paper every night for 5 years. Every single night. Sometimes it says what he told me it said, and I was a fool, and I did 2 extra days in a cell for pride. And sometimes..." He stopped. "Sometimes it's a confession," Clara said. "Sometimes it's a confession. The wind, the stove, nothing else." "Teach me," Jack said. Clara looked up. "You heard me. I'm not asking twice, and I'll thank you not to make it a moment." He shoved the reader across the table at her. "I'm 35 years old, and I can't read a page of a child's book, and there's a man in this valley who signs his name to things. That's not a small thing anymore. That's the whole difference between us. He puts a thing on paper, and it's true forever, and I open my mouth, and it's just weather. His voice finally moved. Teach me to read a paper before I sign it. That's all I want out of this winter. Teach me that. Clara pulled the reader toward her. All right, she said. And that was how the woman nobody wanted spent the worst winter in 40 years sitting at a plank table at 9 o'clock at night, teaching a grown man to sound out BREAD. And neither of them ever laughed once. And if you had asked her afterward what the happiest year of her life was, she'd have told you it was 51 days in a one-room cabin she was carried into against her will. He was slow. He was ferociously, humiliatingly slow, and he never quit. Not for one night. Not even the night the chimney backed up, and they spent 4 hours with the door open and their eyes streaming and their fingers going numb, and then he sat down at 11 o'clock with the reader like nothing had happened, and said, "Where were we?" "Jack, it's nearly midnight." "Where were we, Miss Bennet?" Around day 20, he read a whole page out loud without stopping. He got to the bottom, and he sat there. "Again?" Clara said. He read it again. And then Jack Dawson put the book face down on the table and got up and went outside without his coat, and Clara let him. And when he came back in 8 minutes later, his face was wet, and he said, "Wind's up," and she said, "I know it is," and neither of them ever mentioned it again as long as they lived. The horse died on day 24. It was the mare, Clara's mare, and it was nothing dramatic. She'd gone down in the night that was all old and cold and done, and Clara came out to the lean-to at first light, and found Jack sitting in the straw, with the mare's head in his lap, and he'd been there long enough that the snow on his shoulders had stopped melting. "Jack." "She's gone." "I know. When about 2?" He didn't look up. His hand kept moving on the mare's jaw slow over and over. "She wasn't scared. I want you to know that. She wasn't scared I was right here." Clara stood in that doorway, and something in her chest turned all the way over. This, she thought. This is the dangerous cowboy. This is what they crossed the street from. "You sat with her all night." "Well, she'd have done it for me," Jack said, perfectly serious, and Clara had to bite the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste blood. She sat down in the straw next to him. She didn't ask. She just sat. And after a while he said quietly, "Ellie loved horses. Couldn't ride worth a damn. Fell off every one she ever got on. She'd get up and get right back on and fall off again, and she'd laugh so hard she couldn't breathe." It was the first time he'd said her name like she'd been a person and not a case. "Tell me something else about her," Clara said. "Why?" "Because you've had 5 years of everybody in Montana talking about how she died," Clara said, "and nobody talking about how she lived. That's not right. Somebody ought to. Tell me something else." Jack Dawson was quiet a long time. "She hummed," he said, "all day. Off-key. Drove the cook out of his mind. What'd she hum? Nothing, just nothing. Made it up as she went." "That's a good thing to be remembered for," Clara said. And Jack said thickly, "Yeah, it is." And they sat in the straw with a dead horse until the light came up all the way. Doc Bailey came up on day 31, and he nearly died doing it. They heard the horse before they heard him. Jack heard it. Clara heard nothing at all. But Jack was up and out with the rifle before she'd registered that anything had changed, and 40 seconds later he was hauling a 71-year-old man out of the snow by the coat. "Get the water on. Warm. Get the blankets off my bunk." "Is he?" "He's talking. Man's talking. He's not dying." Jack dumped Doc Bailey into the chair like a sack of grain. "Aren't you Doc?" "Go to hell, Dawson," said Doc Bailey, whose lips were blue. "Yes, sir." It took 2 hours. Clara did the hands, Jack did the feet, and Doc swore at both of them continuously in a rasping whisper for the first 30 minutes, which Jack said was the best sign he'd seen all winter. "Why?" Clara said when the old man could hold a cup. "Why in God's name would you ride 8 miles in this, at your age? Doc, you could have—" "Because nobody else would," Doc Bailey said. The cabin went quiet. That's not an answer." It's the only one there is, girl. He got the cup to his mouth with both hands. It's been 31 days. 31 days and not one soul in that town has ridden up here to see if you're alive. Not one. Ruth begged him. Ruth Abbott stood up in the mercantile and asked for 2 men and a sled, and there wasn't a man in that store who'd look at her. He drank. So I come. Clara sat down slowly. Say it, she said. Whatever it is, you didn't ride 8 miles to look at my hands. Doc Bailey looked at her over the cup for a long moment, and he was old and he was kind, and he had delivered half that valley, and Clara watched him decide to tell her the truth, and she loved him for it, and she never forgave the moment. School board met, he said. 3rd week of January. Emergency session, they called it. 4 of them in Caldwell's front room with his whiskey. They can't meet without... They met. On what, Doc? On what grounds? I haven't done anything I haven't... Clara. Doc set the cup down. Grounds don't come into it. They didn't vote. That's the part I need you to hear. They didn't vote a thing because Henry's too smart for that, and a vote's a piece of paper. He said it gently. They just talked. And by the time they were done talking, everybody in that room understood that come April, there's going to be a discussion about the suitability of the arrangement. That's the word he used. Suitability. And 2 days later, Mrs. Pruitt's cousin in Bozeman got a letter asking whether she'd be available in the spring. The stove ticked. Jack didn't say anything. He'd gone very still by the door, and Clara, who had learned to read that man the way she read a page, knew that stillness now, and it frightened her more than shouting would have. They already hired her, Clara said. They already wrote her. 31 days. Clara heard her own voice from somewhere outside herself. I've been up here 31 days. I haven't done one single thing except not freeze to death. I know it. I taught their children, Doc. I taught Ansel Vance's girls to read. I sat with Mrs. Kelso the whole night her husband died. I was the one holding her me, and now she stopped because it was going to come apart, and she wasn't going to let it come apart in front of a dying old man she'd just thawed out. She stood up. She went to the stove. She stood there with her back to the room and put both hands on the warm iron and breathed. Clara, Doc said. I'm fine. You're not, and there's nobody here you need to be fine for. He sighed, and it was a sigh with 71 years in it. You want to know the ugly part? They're not bad people. That's what nobody ever wants to hear. Ansel Vance is not a bad man. Mrs. Pruitt would give you her coat in the road. They're just scared. And Henry Caldwell has spent 4 years making sure that in this valley, being on the wrong side of Henry Caldwell is expensive. That's all it is. That's all it ever is. It's not evil, it's arithmetic. And Clara Bennett laughed one short, awful sound. You people, she said, and your arithmetic. She turned around. Doc, when Henry Caldwell came here in '82, where'd he come from? Denver, Doc said. Or no. Well, he said Denver. Where else? Girl, I don't know. Montana somewhere. Before that he had cattle interests up. 2 Rivers, Clara said. Doc Bailey's cup stopped halfway to his mouth, and Clara watched a 71-year-old man's face do something she had never seen it do, not over a breech berth, not over a boy with his leg under a wagon, not over anything. He set the cup down very carefully. Who told you that? He said. Nobody answered. Doc Bailey turned in the chair slowly and looked at Jack Dawson standing by the door. Oh, he said. Oh, hell. Oh, hell. Doc. 4 years. The old man's voice had gone hoarse. 4 years, son, and you never said a word. You've been in my surgery a dozen times. You held the lamp when I took Elias Kelso's arm off. You sat in my kitchen. He was breathing hard. 2 Rivers. That's 2 Rivers, isn't it? That's the thing they say about you. Yes, sir. And Henry. Yes, sir. Doc Bailey put both hands over his face. I need to sit down, he said. And Clara said, You are sitting down, Doc. And he said, Then I need to sit down harder. And it wasn't funny, and all 3 of them almost laughed anyway, which is the way of things at the worst moments of a person's life. How long have you known? Doc said finally. Known's a big word. Jack. 4 years, Jack said. And you never? Never what? And there it was. The first crack, the first time in 4 years that anybody in Willow Creek heard Jack Dawson's voice come off the leash. Never went to who the sheriff. He plays cards with Henry every Thursday. The Judge Henry's got a note on his house. This town doc. This town looked at me for 4 years and decided what I was without one fact, and you want to know why I never said anything. Because the second I open my mouth about Henry Caldwell, I'm not a man with a suspicion. I'm the drifter from 2 Rivers who's got a grudge against the man who... He stopped himself, hard. His hand had come up, and he put it down. Nobody breathed. Say it, Doc said quietly. Against the man who got him arrested, Jack said. Clara's head came up. What? Jack didn't look at her. Jack? What did you just say? You never asked how they knew I was on the river road. The room went out from under her. Somebody told them, Clara said. Somebody had to tell them where you were. That's why they came for you Monday morning. They didn't guess somebody told them? She was standing without knowing she'd stood. Who told them, Jack? Man in the hotel lobby, Jack said. Said he saw me from the window. Said he'd seen me hanging around the back of the building more than once. Said he'd been meaning to speak to somebody about it. Henry Caldwell. Henry Caldwell walked into the sheriff's office at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, Jack said, and put my name in it, in writing, with his signature on the bottom. And that's the only piece of paper in the whole business that anybody ever wrote down and kept, and it's got his name on it, and it's about me. He looked at her finally, and his eyes were terrible. That's what a man with 60% of a hotel can do to a man with a bedroll. He doesn't have to do a thing. He just has to be helpful, Doc Bailey said in a whisper. God Almighty. And Clara Bennett stood in the middle of that one-room cabin and finally understood the shape of the thing she was inside. He didn't put my name on that list because he wanted me out of the school, she said slowly. Jack said nothing. Jack, look at me. He didn't do this to me. Her voice was rising and she couldn't stop it. I'm not even in this. I'm not the point. I've spent 31 days up here thinking a rich man hated a spinster school teacher enough to ruin her, and I was flattering myself. Wasn't I? He doesn't hate me. He doesn't think about me at all. She was shaking. He needed you gone. He's needed you gone for 4 years, and he couldn't do it because you never gave him a reason, because you never said a word, and he couldn't run you out of a valley for chopping wood. So he waited for weather. Clara. He waited 4 years for weather. Her hand slammed the table, and Doc Bailey jumped. And then it snowed, and he stood up in my church in front of my children's mothers, and he put my name next to yours, because a man alone in a cabin is nothing but a man alone in a cabin with a woman is a story. He didn't need me ruined. He just needed me attached to you. I'm not the target. I'm the rope. The silence after that was the loudest thing in that cabin all winter. Yes, Jack said. Clara sat down. Say the rest, she said. You're doing the thing. You're doing the thing where you go quiet and let people decide. Don't do it to me, not after 31 days. Say the rest. And Doc Bailey, 71 years old, half-thawed, said hoarsely, Son, Bo Turner. Jack closed his eyes. What about Bo Turner? Clara said. Doc wouldn't look at her. Turner came here with Henry in '82, same wagon. I always figured he was hired in Denver. What about Bo Turner? Clara said again, and her voice had gone very quiet, and Jack Dawson opened his eyes. Bo Turner, he said, was the deputy who arrested me. The stove ticked. The wind pushed. Somewhere down the mountain, 8 miles down, a town was sleeping. He put the irons on me on the courthouse steps at 7 in the morning in front of 200 people, Jack said. He sat outside my cell for 11 days. He's the one who brought me the paper to sign, and he's the one who told me it was a statement of my whereabouts, and when they turned me loose, he walked me to the end of the street and he said, Get on your horse, and if I ever see you again, you'd best be dead already. Jack's voice never rose. It never once rose. And 6 months later, He's driving Henry Caldwell's wagon into this valley with 200 a year and a house. Clara couldn't feel her hands. He was in this cabin, she said. 2 nights ago, he was standing in that door. Yes. He looked at me through that gap. He asked to see me. She was going to be sick. Jack, he knew. He knew you were up here with me. He rode 8 miles up a mountain in a killing storm at midnight to stand in that door and offer you a horse and 2 months' wages, and I thought he was being cruel. I thought it was a threat, and it wasn't. It wasn't a threat at all, was it? No, Jack said. It was a bribe. It was the third one, Jack said. Clara's head came up so fast her neck cracked. The third. 83 Christmas. Man came to the bunkhouse with $100 in an envelope and said Mr. Caldwell had heard I was thinking about California. Jack counted it off on his fingers with no more heat than a man reading a feed bill. 85 after the Kelso thing, when Elias lost the arm, and I was the one that carried him in. Bo found me at the livery and said Mr. Caldwell admired a man who knew when a place was finished with him. And then 2 nights ago. He put his hand down. 4 years. 3 offers. And every one of them bigger than the last. Why didn't you take it? Doc Bailey said. It came out of him raw. Son, why in God's name didn't you take it? $100 in 83, you could have gone anywhere. And Jack Dawson said, because then he wins twice. Nobody spoke. He took her, Jack said. That's once. And every day I stay in this valley and chop wood and mend fence and don't say a word he doesn't know. That's the thing nobody understands. He doesn't know what I know. He doesn't know if she told me. He doesn't know if there's a letter in a box in a bank in Helena with his name on it. He has not slept right in 4 years, and neither have I, and that's the only thing I've got. That's the only justice in the world for a man with a bedroll. His hands were flat on the table. I can't hang him. I can't prove one thing. But I can stand in his valley and be alive in it, and every single time he sees me across the street, he has to think about her. And he'll go to his grave thinking about her. That's mine. That's the only thing that's mine. And he has offered me money 3 times to give it up, and I'd rather freeze. Clara Bennett looked at him. And she understood all at once completely the way you understand a thing you have been looking directly at for a month, that she had gotten it wrong. Everybody had gotten it wrong. This valley had spent 4 years believing Jack Dawson was a drifter who'd washed up in Willow Creek because drifters wash up somewhere. Jack, she said, how did you come to this valley? He didn't answer. You said you came in 82. Her voice was almost nothing. Doc just said Henry Caldwell came in 82, in the spring. Clara. When in 82 did you come, Jack? The fire popped. August, Jack said. After. After. You didn't drift here. Clara's hands had gone to her mouth. Oh my God, you didn't drift here at all. 4 years everybody in this town saying he showed up out of nowhere and you didn't show up, you... I followed him, Jack said. Doc Bailey made a small sound in the chair. I lost him twice. Took me 5 months. Jack's voice was perfectly level, which was the most frightening thing about it. Found him in a bank in Cheyenne, lost him again. Picked him up in Laramie off a cattle bill with his name printed on it. That's the one I could read. That's the only reason I found him at all, because it was printed. He almost smiled. It didn't reach anything. Rode into this valley on the 6th of August, 82, hired on at the Vance place for $11 a month, and I've been here ever since. 4 years, Clara whispered. 4 years. Waiting for what? And Jack Dawson said, I don't know. And that broke her somehow more than any of it. Not the cell, not the street, not the paper. He couldn't read. That I've never known, he said. That's the truth, and I've never said it out loud to a living soul. I didn't come here with a plan. I came here because on the day they turned me loose, I got on my horse, and I understood that if I rode west, I'd be a man who ran forever in every town, and if I followed him, I'd at least be a man who was looking at him. That's all. That's the whole plan. 4 years of looking at him. His voice finally broke one word right in the middle. And I'd have looked at him for 40 more, Clara. I'd have died an old man in that bunkhouse looking at him and never said a word, and it would have been fine because there was nothing else in it. He stopped. And then, Clara said. Jack looked at her across that plank table, across 31 days and 110 schoolbooks, and a page he'd read out loud without stopping. And then he read your name off a list, he said, and I stood up. Clara Bennett couldn't breathe. Do you understand what I did? His hands were shaking now, actually shaking, and she had never once seen them shake. Not on the ledge, not in the ice water. 4 years. 4 years of not giving that man one single thing to use, and I threw it away in about 2 seconds because he made a joke about a schoolteacher. He's got me now. He's got exactly what he needed, and I handed it to him standing up in a church in front of 40 witnesses, and he sat there and let me. Jack, he wanted me to stand up. Jack's voice cracked wide open. That's the whole thing. That's what I've been sitting with for 31 days. He didn't gamble. He knew. He's watched me for 4 years, same as I watched him. You think he doesn't know what I am? He knows exactly what I am. He knew I'd let him say anything about me. He's proved that 3 times with an envelope. So he found the one thing on this earth I wouldn't sit still for. He looked at her, and his eyes were wet and furious and absolutely clear. He found somebody else to do it to. In front of me. The wind stopped. That's the thing. Clara remembered, the wind actually stopped for maybe 4 seconds the way it does, and in those 4 seconds the cabin was so quiet, she could hear Doc Bailey's watch. That's why he chose me, she said. That's why he chose you. Not because I was alone. Her voice didn't sound like hers. Not because I was convenient. Not because of my age. Not because nobody wanted me. He chose me because he needed a woman that man would stand up for, and a town that wouldn't. Yes, Jack said. He looked at that hall, Clara said, and he picked the one person you'd break 4 years of silence for. Yes, how did he know? She was crying now, and she didn't care at all. Jack, how could he possibly know that you'd never spoken to me? Not once in 4 years. You tipped your hat to me outside the Mercantile twice, and I crossed the street from you like everybody else I did. I crossed the street, I did it in October, and you saw me do it. I know you did. Then how did he know? And Jack Dawson said very quietly, because he's got eyes, Clara. And because I've been standing in the back of that church every Sunday for 4 years. Clara stopped. You don't go to church, she said. No, Jack said. I don't. Then what were you doing there? Clara said. Jack didn't answer. And Doc Bailey, 71 years old, half-thawed, sitting in a chair with a cup he'd forgotten he was holding, said, "Oh, you poor damn fool," in a voice like a man watching a wagon go over a ledge. Doc, 4 years. Doc set the cup down. 4 years I've watched you come in that door at 5 minutes past the hour and stand in the back with your hat in your hands and go out before the last hymn, and I thought, well, there's a man who wants God, but doesn't figure God wants him. That's what I thought. That's what I told Ruth Abbott when she asked me. Doc? And it was never God at all, was it, son? Jack Dawson stood up. He went to the stove, and he put a stick in it that it did not need, and he stood there with his back to the room, and Clara Bennett watched a man try to find a door in a wall he'd built himself. Jack, she said. Miss Bennett. Don't you Miss Bennett me, not tonight? Not after the last 2 hours. Her voice was shaking. You just told me a girl is dead, and you followed her killer across 2 territories for 5 months, and you've stood in his valley for 4 years without saying a word. You told me all of that. And now you can't say this? No, Jack said. Why? Because that one's worse. Clara laughed a cracked, disbelieving sound. Worse than... Yes. He turned around. Because the rest of it was done to me. The stove ticked. Clara. His hands opened and closed. The rest of it I never chose. I didn't choose that alley. I didn't choose that cell. I didn't choose to lose him twice in Wyoming, or find him in a bank in Cheyenne. Every bit of it happened at me, and all I ever did was keep my feet." He swallowed. "That's not a sin. A man's got no reason to be ashamed of what's done to him, and it took me 5 years to learn that, and I only half believe it." "And this I chose," Jack said. "Every Sunday, 4 years. Nobody made me." Doc Bailey said quietly, "Say it out loud, son. It's been in that chest 4 years. It's going to break something on the way out, but it's going to break something worse staying in." Jack looked at Clara. "The second Sunday I was in this valley," he said. "You stood up in front of that church and read the lesson because Pastor Whitfield had the grip. You were 23 years old. And the Vance girl, the little one, the one with the ears, she started crying in the second row because she'd wet herself and she was ashamed, and 40 people turned around and looked at her." His voice was low and even and terrible. "And you stopped reading. In the middle of a sentence in front of the whole town, you set the book down, and you went down off that step, and you picked that child up, and you put her on your hip, and you carried her out. And nobody said a word to you about it, because they were all too busy being embarrassed. And you never came back in. You sat with her on the steps for 40 minutes till her mother came out. And I know that because I was standing at the back of that church, and I went out the side, and I stood in the road like a fool, and I watched you do it." Clara had both hands over her mouth. "I'd been out of that cell 8 months, Jack said. 8 months of walking into towns and watching people look at me and decide. 8 months of they say. And I stood in the road in Willow Creek, Montana, and I watched a woman ruin her own morning in front of 40 people for a child who'd never remember it." He stopped. He had to. "And I thought there's one of them that's real. Jack. So I came back the next Sunday." He said it flatly like a confession to a crime. "And the one after. And the one after that. 4 years. 200 Sundays near enough. I never sang. I never prayed. I never once said good morning to you because I knew exactly what my good morning was worth in this valley, and I wasn't going to spend it on you." His jaw was working. "I just stood in the back for 40 minutes a week and looked at somebody who was real, and then I went back up the mountain and chopped wood for another 6 days. "You could have talked to me," Clara whispered. "No, ma'am." "Jack, I would have—" "You crossed the street in October," Jack said. It landed like a slap. Clara flinched. "I'm not throwing it at you." His voice broke right down the middle and he hauled it back. "God, Clara, I'm not. That's my whole point. You crossed the street, and I stood there and I thought, well, there it is. That's what I am even to the real one. And I wasn't angry. That's what I need you to understand. I have never once been angry at you for that, not for 1 second, because you were right. You'd been told a thing about me, and you had nobody to tell you different, and you were a woman alone, and you did the sensible thing." He wiped his face with the back of his wrist hard like he was annoyed with it. "That's what he does, you see. That's what Henry Caldwell does. He doesn't have to make you hate me. He just makes it sensible not to know me." Nobody said anything for a while. Then Doc Bailey, in the smallest voice Clara had ever heard from him. 200 Sundays. "About?" "Son." The old man's chin was going. "Son, I sat in the 4th pew for 200 Sundays, and I never once turned around. And that not 2 rivers, not the cell, not the paper, that was what finally undid Jack Dawson." He put his hand on the back of the chair and gripped it until the wood creaked, and he didn't cry exactly. It was more like a man holding a door shut while something enormous went past on the other side. "It's all right, Doc." "It is not all right. It's 4 years ago." "It's every Sunday," Doc Bailey said. Clara stood up. She crossed that cabin, and she stood in front of Jack Dawson, and she did the only thing there was to do, which was take his hand, the right one, the one with the 2 fingers still waxy at the tips, and hold it in both of hers the way she had in the water. "Then I'm turning around," she said. He looked at her. "Right now. 31 days late, and I'm turning around." Her eyes were streaming, and her voice was absolutely steady, which was the second miracle she got that winter. "Good morning, Mr. Dawson." Jack Dawson made a sound she never described to anybody ever. "Good morning, Miss Bennett," he said. Doc Bailey stayed 9 days because there was no getting down and he'd have died trying. And afterward, he said those 9 days did more for his opinion of the human race than 50 years of doctoring. He watched them. That's what he told Ruth Abbott later. And Ruth Abbott told exactly one person, and then never told anybody else as long as she lived. Which is how you know it was true. I watched them for 9 days, Doc said. I'm an old man, and I've seen every kind of thing a man and a woman can be to each other. And I want you to understand what I saw in that cabin, Ruth. I saw him knock. Every time. 15 times a day in his own damn cabin he knocked. I saw him sleep on a floor in his boots with a horse blanket on a rope between them, and I saw her get up at 4 to have coffee hot when he came in from the stock, and neither one of them ever said a word about it, and neither one of them ever touched the other one once. Not once, Ruth. Not in 9 days. I was awake. I'd have known, and I have never in my life seen two people that far gone. On the 4th day, Doc watched Clara Bennett teach a 35-year-old man to read the word therefore, and he had to get up and go stand in the lean-to with the horses. On the 6th day he said, "Jack, come here and let me look at those fingers." And Jack said, "They're fine." And Clara said, "Sit down, Jack Dawson." And he sat down instantly, and Doc Bailey laughed so hard he pulled something. "What?" Jack said. "Nothing." Doc wheezed. "Nothing at all, son. Give me your hand." He looked at the fingers a long time. "You'll keep 'em," he said. "You'll lose some feeling in the tips. Who did this?" "Did what?" "Somebody thawed these right. Warm water, not hot, not near the fire, and held 'em through it." Doc looked up. "Who?" "She did." Doc Bailey turned his head and looked at Clara Bennett for a long moment. "Girl," he said, "who taught you that?" "You did," Clara said. "March of '80, the Kelso boys' feet. You made every woman in that room watch, and you said someday one of you is going to be the only one there." Doc's eyes went bright. "I said that. You said it twice." "Huh," said Doc Bailey, and blew his nose for a while. They came down on the 14th of April, 51 days. Jack went first on foot, leading both horses, and Clara rode, and Doc rode behind, and Clara Bennett spent the last mile of that trail rehearsing every single thing she was going to say, and it turned out not to matter at all, because when they came around the shoulder above the creek, they could see the town, and there were people in the road. A lot of people. "Doc," Clara said, "why are there people in the road?" Doc Bailey didn't answer. "Doc." "Word gets around," he said. It's Tuesday morning, and there are 40 people standing in the road." Jack stopped the horses. He stood there a moment with the reins in his hand, and Clara watched the back of his neck and knew the way she'd learned to know that man over 51 days exactly what he was thinking. "Don't," she said. "Clara, don't you dare say it. I'll take you as far as Ruth's," Jack said, not turning around. "And then I'm going to go get my things out of the bunkhouse." "And go where?" "Anywhere." "Jack, he's going to use me on you." Jack's voice was perfectly calm. That was the worst part. It was the calmest she'd ever heard it. "Every single day for the rest of your life in this valley, he's going to use me on you. And there is one way to take that away from him, and it's for me to be gone by Thursday. And then he wins twice," Clara said. Jack's hand tightened on the rein. "That's your line," she said. "That's what you said to Doc sitting at that table, and I've thought about it every night since. He took her, that's once, and you stayed anyway 4 years, and that's the only thing you've ever had." She leaned forward in the saddle. "So don't you hand it to him now, not for me, not to make me comfortable. Jack Dawson, if you get on that horse Thursday, then every single thing you did for 4 years was for nothing. And Ellie Marsh's name goes in the ground with her, and Henry Caldwell buys licorice for the Vance children until he's 80. Is that what you want?" Jack didn't move. "Say something," Clara said. "I don't want you in it," he said. "I'm already in it." "You're in it because of me." "I'm in it because of him." She got down off the horse. She walked around and she stood in front of him in the middle of the trail. And because I stood up in that hall, and because I said fine. That was mine, Jack. Nobody made me say it. You've spent 5 years letting people tell you what you are. Don't you start doing it to me." Jack Dawson looked at her a long time. "Miss Bennet," he said, "you are going to be a very inconvenient woman." "Yes," Clara said. "I am." They went down. Nobody spoke. That was the thing Clara had not prepared for in 51 days of preparing. She'd prepared for shouting. She'd prepared for Henry Caldwell, and for whispers, and for Mrs. Pruitt's face, and for the word suitability. She had not prepared for 40 people standing in the road in absolute silence, watching a woman ride into town, and not one of them saying anything at all. Then Sam Pruitt broke. He came off his mother's hip and out of the crowd like something fired from a gun, and he hit Clara Bennett's legs at a dead run before her second foot was out of the stirrup, and he wrapped both arms around her and started howling. "Sam, you said you'd come back. Sam, honey. You said." "I did come back," Clara said. "Look at me, I came back." And Mrs. Pruitt came out of the crowd. Clara braced. She actually braced. She felt her own shoulders come up, and she hated herself for it, and she couldn't help it. Mrs. Pruitt stopped 4 feet away. She looked at Clara Bennet. She looked at her son, with his arms locked around the schoolteacher's legs. She opened her mouth, and nothing came out, and she closed it. And then she said, "He's forgotten his letters, all winter. He's forgotten every one. Ellen, he can't read a word." Her voice was climbing, and Clara realized with a shock that the woman was furious not at her. "Not a word. And I sat with him every night. And I'm not. I never had any schooling. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you got it into him, and I couldn't keep it there for 8 weeks. She stopped. Her chin was going. And there wasn't anybody to ask. There wasn't anybody to ask Miss Bennet, because you were up a mountain and we put you there. The road went very quiet. "Ellen," Clara said, "bring him Monday." Mrs. Pruitt made a sound and put her hand over her face. "Bring him Monday and we'll start again." "They're saying there won't be a Monday," somebody said from the back of the crowd. And there it was. Clara straightened up. She put her hand on Sam's head, and she looked out at that road at 40 people who had let her go up a mountain, and not one of whom had ridden up to see if she was alive. "Who's saying?" she said. Nobody answered. No, we're going to do this now in the road at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning because I have had 51 days to think about it, and I am done being talked about." Her voice carried. It was a schoolteacher's voice. It had carried over 31 children for 6 years, and it carried over that crowd like a bell. "Who's saying there won't be a Monday?" Ansel Vance said, "Clara. Say it, Ansel. It ain't like that." "Then what's it like?" And Ansel Vance, who was not a bad man, who Doc Bailey had said would give her his coat in the road, looked at the ground. "There's a board meeting Friday," he said. "About my suitability." His head came up. "Who told you that?" "Does it matter?" "Clara, I want you to know, I never said one word against—" "I know you didn't," Clara said, and it came out gentler than she meant it to, and that was somehow worse for him. She watched it go into him like a knife. "That's the whole trouble, Ansel. Nobody said one word against me. Nobody ever does. It just happens, and everybody stands in the road looking at their boots wondering how." Ansel Vance's face went red and then white. "And you," Clara said and turned. Henry Caldwell was standing at the edge of the crowd. He'd been there the whole time. He was very good at that. Clara would think about it for years afterward, how a man that size in a coat, that expensive, could be somewhere for 10 minutes before you noticed him, and how that was not an accident, that was a skill, and he had spent his whole life practicing it. "Miss Bennet," he said warmly. "Thank God." And he came forward with both hands out. "We've been sick about it. Sick. 51 days and no way up that trail I sent Bo twice. You know he nearly died the second time. He came once, Clara said, at midnight, in February. The crowd stirred. Caldwell didn't miss a beat. He was magnificent. She had to give him that, and she never forgot it. And it was the thing that frightened her most about him for the rest of her life. Twice, he said sorrowfully. He turned back the first time at the second creek. He didn't tell you that's Bo. Wouldn't take credit for sunrise. He shook his head. Well, you're down. You're down, and you're whole. And I'll tell you plain, ma'am, this valley owes you an apology, and I intend to be first in line to give it. Clara stared at him. He's going to do it right here, she thought with a kind of awe. He's going to be kind to me in front of 40 people right now, and by supper it'll be, Henry Caldwell was the first man in that road to shake her hand, and by Friday it'll be Henry Caldwell did everything he could for that poor girl, but the board's the board. Mr. Caldwell, she said. Friday. Ma'am? The board meets Friday. He didn't blink. There's a meeting. There's always a meeting. It's April. About me. About the school. He spread his hands, rueful, a man burdened. Clara, may I call you Clara? I've fought for you in that room. You won't ever hear it from me again, so hear it once I've fought for you. But you have to understand what you're asking those men to do. There are mothers in this valley who— Name one, Clara said. Silence. Name one mother. She hadn't raised her voice. She'd dropped it, and every person in that road leaned in. You've said there are mothers twice now in 51 days, once in that church and once just now, and I'd like a name. One. Point at her. She's standing right here. Clara turned in a slow circle looking at them. Ellen, is it you, Mrs. Kelso Ruth? Nobody spoke. That's what I thought, Clara said. There's no mothers, Mr. Caldwell. There are mothers. Nobody's ever met her. She doesn't exist. She's never once been named out loud in the whole history of this valley, and she has ruined more women in it than the winter has. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman said, Amen, and it was Ruth Abbott, and she said it loud. Henry Caldwell smiled, and for 1/2 second, one Clara Bennett saw the flicker again, the same one she'd seen in the church hall in December, and she understood that she had just made an enemy for life. And she understood something else too, something that turned her cold in the April sun. He was pleased. She'd fought back, in public, in the road. That was better for him than if she'd cried. Well, Caldwell said, Friday then. And he tipped his hat, and he turned to go, and then, because he was who he was, because he could not help it, because the smile was a disease and not a decision, he stopped. Dawson. Jack was standing by the horses. He hadn't moved through any of it. Mr. Caldwell, you brought her down whole, 51 days. Caldwell's voice was pitched to Carrie. It reached every ear in that road. Now I've said things about you. I own that. And I'll say this in front of the whole town, a lesser man would have taken advantage of that situation, and by every account I've heard you did not. The crowd murmured. It was generous. It was gracious. 40 people heard a rich man give a drifter his due in the public road, and Clara Bennett stood there with the blood roaring in her ears, because she had spent 51 days learning to read Jack Dawson and about 90 seconds learning to read Henry Caldwell, and she heard exactly what he'd just done. By every account I've heard, he'd just told the whole town there were accounts. There's a lot of accounts are there, Jack said. Talk Dawson. It's a small valley. Whose? Caldwell chuckled. Now that's not— You said by every account, Jack said. In the road. In front of everybody. So I'm asking whose account, Mr. Caldwell, because there was 4 of us on that mountain in 51 days, and one of 'em's a horse. Somebody laughed. It was shocked out of them. It was the first time in 4 years that anybody in Willow Creek had heard Jack Dawson make a joke, and it went through that crowd like current. Caldwell's smile did not move 1/1000th of an inch. Bo went up, he said. Bo stood in my door for 4 minutes at midnight in February and never saw past my shoulder, Jack said. That's his account. 4 minutes and a shoulder. What's the rest of 'em? Dawson. Because I'd like to hear 'em, Henry. The road had gone absolutely silent. 40 people. Nobody moved. Ruth Abbott would say later that she had never in her life felt anything like it, that the air had gone tight, that she'd wanted to grab her husband's arm and couldn't lift her hand. "I'd like to hear every account there is," Jack said, out loud, right here with a name attached to it. "That's all I've ever wanted from any of you for 4 years. A name attached to it." He looked around that road slow, and one by one they looked away, every single one of them. They say, "That's all anybody's ever given me." They say, "Well, here's the whole town in the road. Here's every day there is, so let's hear it." Nobody said one word, and Jack Dawson turned back to Henry Caldwell and said very quietly, "That's what I thought." Caldwell held his eyes for a moment. Then he laughed warm, delighted, a big man's laugh, and clapped Jack on the shoulder and said, "By God, he talks!" And the crowd laughed with him because they were so relieved to be allowed to, and he walked off down the road with his hand raised, and it was over, and he had won. Clara felt it happen. She felt 40 people exhale. "He turned it into a joke," she said. She was shaking. "Jack, he stood there, and he told them there were accounts, and then he made it a joke, and by Friday, I know. You gave him exactly what he—" "I know what I did," Jack said. "Then why?" And Jack Dawson, watching Henry Caldwell walk away down the middle of Willow Creek with his hat in his hand, said, "Because he's never had to talk to me before." Clara stopped. 4 years. Jack's eyes had not left the man's back. 4 years he's been able to do all of it from across a street. And just now in front of 40 people he had to stand in the road and answer me. He finally looked at her. "He didn't like it, Clara." He laughed. "He laughed late," Jack said. Clara went back over it, the way she'd go over it 1,000 times. He was right. Bo Turner came to Ruth Abbott's door on Thursday night. Clara was in the kitchen, with the school register open in front of her, and her hands flat on it, and she heard Ruth's husband say, "Well, I'll be damned," in the front room, and then Ruth said, "Clara," in a voice that brought her out of the chair. He was standing on the step with his hat off. "Miss Bennett." "Mr. Turner? Could I have a minute of your time, outside?" "No," Clara said. He blinked. "You may have a minute of my time in Ruth Abbott's front room with Ruth Abbott and Amos Abbott sitting in it," Clara said. "And you may have it with the door open, or you may go home." Bo Turner stood there a moment. Then he laughed, a short, tired, entirely genuine laugh, and it was such an unexpected sound that Clara found herself off balance for the first time in a week. "He said you'd say something like that," Turner said. "Who did? Dawson?" Clara's whole body went cold. "When?" she said. "When did you talk to Jack?" 20 minutes ago." Turner turned his hat over in his hands. "In the livery. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to sit down for this, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Abbott to stay, and I want the door open, and I want you to know before I open my mouth that I'm not here on Mr. Caldwell's business." His jaw worked. "This is the first thing I've done in 4 years that isn't Mr. Caldwell's business." Ruth Abbott said, "You get in this house." He got in the house. He sat on the edge of Ruth's good chair with his hat between his knees, and he was 46 years old, and he looked 60, and he did not touch the coffee Ruth put in front of him. "I put the irons on that man," he said. 200 people watching. 7 o'clock in the morning on the courthouse steps in Two Rivers, Montana, November of '81. I want that said out loud first before anything else, because I've never said it out loud, and I've been in this valley 4 years listening to people say they say about him, and I'm the they. He looked up. "There's no they, ma'am. Never was. It's just me. It's always just been me and Mr. Caldwell and a sheriff who's dead now." Clara couldn't speak. "I brought him the paper," Turner said. "Day 9. "What was on it?" Clara said. Bo Turner looked at his hat. "That's what I come to say," he said. "I don't know." "You don't?" "I never read it either, ma'am." His voice cracked straight across. "I can't read but my own name and about 40 words." Sheriff handed it to me in the office and said, "Take this into Dawson and tell him it's a statement of his whereabouts, and if he signs it he can go home." And I took it in, and I told him exactly that word for word. And he looked at it for a long time, and he handed it back and he said no. Turner's hands were shaking on the hat brim, and I was angry at him. I want you to know that. I stood there and I thought, you stubborn son of a gun, you could walk out of here tonight, and I sat outside that cell 2 more days because of him, and I hated him for it. The clock in Ruth Abbott's front room ticked 11 times before anybody said anything. And then, Clara whispered, and then in '82 Mr. Caldwell offered me $200 a year and a house, Bo Turner said, and I've been driving his wagon ever since, and I have not slept a whole night through since I was 39 years old. And I could not have told you why until about 20 minutes ago. What happened 20 minutes ago? Bo Turner looked up, and his eyes were red. I went to the livery to make him the offer again, he said. 4th time. Mr. Caldwell told me this morning $200 a good horse a letter, and the school teacher keeps her school, and I was to have his answer before the board sits tomorrow. He swallowed. And I stood there in that livery, and I said my piece, and he heard me out, and then he said, his voice went. Say it, Ruth Abbott said. He said, Bo, what did the paper say? Clara put her hand over her mouth. 4 years, Turner said. 4 years, and he never once, not on the courthouse steps, not in that cell, not the night. He could have hung for it. He never once asked me a thing. And tonight, he asked me that. His whole face came apart. And I had to stand in a livery in front of a man I put irons on and say I don't know Jack. I couldn't read it either. Nobody breathed. And you know what he did? Turner's voice was almost nothing. He didn't cuss me. He didn't hit me. Lord God, I wanted him to hit me. He just stood there. And then he said, then there's 2 of us he did it to. Ruth Abbott sat down hard. Mr. Turner, Clara said. Her voice didn't sound like hers. Where is that paper now? That's the thing. Turner wiped his face with the heel of his hand. That's the thing I come here to say, and I'd have said it to Dawson, but he'd already walked out. The sheriff died in '84. Office burned in '85. Everything, all of it, 20 years of paper gone. He looked at her. Except what got sent out. There's things that got sent out. Warrants and such go to the territorial clerk in Helena, and statements. Statements go in the case file, and the case file went to Helena in '82 when they closed it out because the Marsh family kept writing letters and somebody wanted them to stop. Clara Bennett stood up very slowly. Mr. Turner, she said, are you telling me that piece of paper still exists? I'm telling you, I don't know, Bo Turner said. I'm telling you, nobody's ever looked. In 5 years, ma'am, nobody has ever looked, because the only 2 men on this earth who ever held that paper in their hands couldn't read a word of it. Ruth Abbott got up and shut her own front door, which she had told the man to leave open, and nobody objected. Amos, she said, get Doc. Ruth, it's near 10. Get Doc Bailey out of his bed and get him in this house. And if he complains, tell him it's the school teacher and Bo Turner sitting in my front room together, and see how fast he finds his boots. Amos Abbott went. Clara had not sat back down. She was standing in the middle of Ruth's rug with her hands opening and closing at her sides, and she was doing arithmetic, the real kind. The kind that had run her life for 6 years, and every column of it came out the same. Helena's 240 miles, she said. 280 by the pass, Turner said. The board sits tomorrow at 4. Yes, ma'am. So it doesn't matter. Clara laughed, and it came out ugly. Do you hear that, Mr. Turner? You have ridden up here with the only true thing anybody's said about Jack Dawson in 5 years, and it doesn't matter, because there's a piece of paper in Helena and a room full of men in Willow Creek, and they're 280 miles apart, and one of them meets tomorrow. Miss Bennett. No, I want you to sit in that chair and hear it because you've had 4 years. She rounded on him. 4 years of $200 a year in a house. You could have said this in '83. You could have said it to Doc. You could have said it in the road on Tuesday when Henry Caldwell stood there and told this whole town there were accounts of what happened in that cabin. You were standing 30 feet behind him. Mr. Turner, I saw you. You were holding his horse. Bo Turner did not defend himself. That was the thing that stopped her. He sat there with his hat in his hands and took it, all of it, every word, and Clara Bennett heard her own voice in that room and heard exactly whose voice it was. It was the church hall. It was 40 people looking at the floor while a man read a list. She stopped. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't." His head came up. "Ma'am, don't you dare. You say every word of it. You say it twice." His eyes were wet and furious. "I've been waiting 4 years for somebody to say it to my face, and there hasn't been a soul in this valley with the nerve, because I'm Mr. Caldwell's man, and everybody's got a note or a lease or a job. You go on." Clara looked at him a long moment. "No," she said quietly. "I'm done. I've got nothing to spend on you, Mr. Turner. I've got until 4 o'clock tomorrow." Doc Bailey came through that door in 19 minutes with his coat over his nightshirt. He looked at Bo Turner sitting in Ruth Abbott's good chair, and he stopped dead in the doorway. "Well," he said, "God help us all. Doc, sit down, Bo." Doc came in and pulled a chair around and sat in it backward like a man 40 years younger. "Say it fast and say it plain, and if you're lying to this girl, I'll know inside 2 sentences, because I've been listening to men lie to me on their backs for 50 years, and it's the only skill I've got left." Turner said it fast and plain. It took 4 minutes. When he was done, Doc Bailey sat there with his hands on the chair back and his mouth working, and then he said one word very softly, and it was not a word Clara had ever heard him use. "Doc." "2 of them," Doc said. 2 grown men in a room with a piece of paper, and neither one of them could read it, and the man who wrote it knew that. He looked up and his face had gone gray. Clara, listen to me. That's not a coincidence." The room went still. "What?" "Think." Doc's voice had dropped. "You're the sheriff. You've got a drifter in a cell 9 days and nothing to hold him on. You want him to sign a statement. Why do you send Bo Turner in with it?" "Because Bo was the deputy. Because Bo's the only man in that office who can't read it either," Doc said. Bo Turner made a sound like he'd been kicked. "Somebody had to hand it over." Doc went on relentless. "And whoever wrote that paper needed a man to carry it in and say it's a statement of your whereabouts and mean it. Bo, did the sheriff know you couldn't read?" Turner's face had gone white to the lips. "Everybody knew," he whispered. "It weren't a secret. He'd used to josh me about it. Give me a warrant and say don't lose it. Bo, you'll never find it again. And he sent you in with that paper anyway." "Yes. Not the clerk, not the other deputy. You." Bo Turner started to shake. "Doc," Clara said. "Doc, stop, look at him." "No." Doc Bailey's voice cut through the room like a bone saw. "No, girl, he's going to hear it. And he's going to hear it tonight because he's had 4 years of not knowing, and I'm not letting him have 4 more. Bo, look at me." The old man leaned in. "You didn't do it. You want the truth from a man who's got no reason to be kind to you. You did not do it. You were the tool. That's all you ever were. You were a hammer, and a hammer's got no say in what gets hit, and the man who swung you knew exactly what he had in his hand." Bo Turner put his face in his hat and made a sound Clara Bennett never repeated to anybody. 46 years old, he said into it. 46 years old, and I know it. I hated him. 9 years, no, 5 years. I've hated that man for costing me 2 days of sleeping in a chair, and he was the only honest man in the whole. I know it, son. Don't you call me son. Turner's head came up wrecked. Don't you dare. I'm not a boy, I'm a grown man who put irons on. You're a grown man who rode out here tonight. Doc Bailey said, when there wasn't a nickel in it for you, and there's a house and $200 a year going out the window, and it took you 4 years, and 4 years is a disgrace, and you came anyway. That's what you are. That's the whole of what you are, Bo, and you can spend the rest of your life arguing with me about it, but I've got the only vote that counts, because I'm the one that's looking at you. And Ruth Abbott, who had not said a word in 5 minutes, put her hand flat on Bo Turner's shoulder and left it there. He didn't shake it off. Where's Jack? Clara said. Everybody looked up. Ma'am? He walked out of the livery 20 minutes before you came here. Where did he go? Bo Turner opened his mouth, and Clara Bennett watched a man's face change, and she was moving before he got the first word out. "Oh no," she said. "No. Miss Bennett, he was saddling, wasn't he?" She was already at the door. "When you found him in that livery, 20 minutes before 10 o'clock at night. He wasn't standing there, Mr. Turner. He was saddling. You said he'd walked out. Walked out where he's got no bunk. Caldwell's got his bunk. Where does a man with no bunk walk out to at 10 o'clock at?" "He was saddling," Turner said. Ruth said, "Clara, wait." Clara Bennett was gone. She ran the length of Willow Creek in the dark in a borrowed shawl, and she was 27 years old, and she had not run since she was a girl, and she came into that livery with her lungs on fire and her hair down, and she stood in the middle of it, and there was nothing. No horse, no saddle on the third peg where his saddle had hung for 4 years. Nothing. "No," she said. "No, no, no." And a voice out of the dark at the back said, "Miss Bennett." She screamed. She was not proud of it. She screamed out loud like a child. And Jack Dawson came out of the tack room with a lamp in his hand, and his shirt half unbuttoned, and a look of pure alarm on his face, and Clara Bennett hit him hard enough in the chest with both hands that he went back a step. "You, Clara, your horse is gone." "I sold my horse," Jack said. She stopped. The lamp swung between them. "You," Clara said very carefully, "sold your horse 2 hours ago to Amos Abbott's brother-in-law for $31, which is 11 more than he's worth because the man's a fool about a blaze face." Jack set the lamp down on the barrel. "And I sold my saddle to Ansel Vance for 9, and my rifle to the Mercantile for 6, and Doc's got my winter coat, and he's going to give me $4 for it Saturday, and I'm going to let him, even though it's worth about 80 cents, because he's an old man, and it makes him feel useful." Clara could not make a single word come out. $50.40, Jack said. "It's in my hat. You want to count it, it's in my hat." "Why?" "Stage leaves Bozeman Monday," Jack said. "Helena's 280 by the pass, and I can't ride it in 4 days, and neither can anybody else. But there's a freight wagon going down to the railhead at Livingston Saturday morning with the Kelso boys driving. And if I'm on it, I'm in Helena Tuesday, and the territorial clerk's office is open Wednesday, and I've got $50.40 to pay whatever a man pays to be shown a 5-year-old case file." Clara Bennett sat down. There was nothing to sit down on. She sat down on the floor of the livery in a borrowed shawl and put both hands over her face. "Miss Bennett, you sold everything you own," she said. "I own a hat and a bedroll and about $110 in a can under the third joist of the Vance barn." He crouched down in front of her. "Which is now $160.40. Clara, I'm not. Will you look at me? I'm not going anywhere. I'm going and coming back. There's a difference, and I need you to hear it. The board sits at 4 o'clock tomorrow. I know. You'll be in Livingston. I know. They're going to take my school tomorrow, Jack, and you're going to be on a freight wagon." And Jack Dawson said, "Yes." Clara looked up. "That's it?" "Yes, Clara." His voice was very low. "I can't save your school. I've been sitting in that tack room for 2 hours doing that arithmetic, and there's no way to make it come out. If I stand in that room tomorrow and say one word, I make it worse. You know I do. You know it every minute. Jack Dawson stands in a room defending Clara Bennett is another shovel of dirt on her." His jaw set. "So no, I can't win Friday. Friday's lost. Friday was lost in December." "Then what?" "But he can't be both," Jack said. Clara went still. "What?" 4 years. Jack's eyes had gone strange, bright, and terribly steady. 4 years he's had it both ways. He's the man who gave this town the water pump, and he's the man who put my name in it in 2 rivers. Nobody in this valley has ever had to hold those 2 things at the same time, because nobody's ever been able to put 'em in the same room." He leaned in. "Clara, if that paper's in Helena, if there's one sheet of paper in a box with his signature on the bottom of it, and something on it that isn't what he told two men who couldn't read, then he can't be both anymore. And it doesn't matter that it's Wednesday and not Friday. It doesn't matter if it's next year. He doesn't get to be both ever again for the rest of his life. And if there's nothing in that box... Jack was quiet. "Say it," Clara said. "Then I've got $160 and no horse," Jack said, "and I'll walk back." Clara Bennett laughed and cried at the same time, which she had not known a person could do. 280 miles. "I'd walk it twice," Jack said, "for a look in that box." And then, because it was 10 o'clock at night in an empty livery, and there was nobody in the world to see it, Clara reached out and put her hand flat on his chest, over the shirt, over the heart, the way she had wanted to for 31 days and had not. Jack Dawson did not move. 51 days, she said, "and you never touched me once." "No, ma'am." "Why?" "Because you couldn't leave," Jack said. Clara's hand closed in his shirt. "You want to know the worst part of that whole winter?" His voice had gone rough. "It wasn't the cold. It was every single night lying on a floor 8 feet from you, knowing that if I ever, then every word Henry Caldwell said in that church was true. Not almost true. True. He'd have been right, Clara. About me. For the rest of my life, he'd have been right, and I'd have known it, and so would you." He shook his head once. "There was one thing in that cabin he couldn't touch, and it was the fact that he was wrong. That's all I had. I wasn't going to hand him that either." "And now," Clara said. "Now you can leave," Jack said. "You can walk out that door and go to Ruth's, and there's not a mountain or a storm or a list in it. You're standing in a livery in the middle of a town you can walk out of any second you want." So, Jack said, and stopped, and Clara Bennett watched the bravest man she had ever known lose his nerve completely. She waited. She was very, very good at waiting. "So I'd like to say something to you," Jack said. "And I'd like to say it Wednesday in Helena when I know what's in that box. Because if it's in there, Clara, if it's in there, then I'm a man with a name and I can say it. And if it's not..." His throat worked. "If it's not, then I'm still the drifter from Two Rivers, and I'm not going to ask a woman to carry that, and I'll come back and chop wood and I'll never say a word." "Jack Dawson," Clara said. "Ma'am, you are the most stubborn, thick-headed..." She had him by both sides of the shirt now. "You would let a filing clerk in Helena decide whether you get to love somebody?" Jack made a small, wrecked sound. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what I'd do." "Why?" "Because I've got nothing else to give you but my name," Jack said. "And I'd like to know if it's mine before I hand it over." Clara Bennett let go of his shirt. She stood up. She smoothed her skirt with hands that would not hold still, and she looked down at him crouched on the floor of that livery with $50.40 in his hat, and she said, "Then go get it." The board sat at 4 o'clock on Friday in Henry Caldwell's front room, and Clara Bennett was not invited. That was the thing that broke Ruth Abbott in the end, not the meeting, but that. 6 years. 6 years of that woman's life. 31 children, and they sat in a rich man's parlor with his whiskey and discussed her suitability, and nobody thought to knock on the door and ask her to come. So Clara went anyway. She walked up Henry Caldwell's front path at 4:15 in her good dress with the school register under her arm, and she knocked on the door, and Caldwell's girl opened it and went white. "Miss Bennett, tell Mr. Caldwell the teacher's here." There was a long silence in that house. Then Henry Caldwell came into the hall with a glass in his hand and the smile on his face and said warmly, "Clara, this isn't... it's about me. It's a board matter. It's about me, Henry." She had never called him Henry. The smile flickered. "There's no provision," he said, for the subject of a discussion to attend the... "Show me," Clara said, and put the register in his hands. He looked down at it. "What's this?" "It's the school register. 6 years, every child, every day, every mark." Her voice carried down that hall into that parlor, and she made sure it did. "There's a page in the back with the bylaws of the Willow Creek School Board copied out in my own hand, because I copied them out my first week when I was 21 years old, and I thought that mattered. Show me the provision. You've got it in your hands. Find it, and read it to me, and I'll go home." Henry Caldwell stood in his own hallway holding a schoolteacher's register. And for the second time in Clara Bennett's life, she watched him take 4 full seconds to answer. "Come in," he said. There were 4 of them in that parlor, and Clara knew every one of them and had taught 3 of their children. Nobody looked at her. "Gentlemen," Caldwell said, "easy as Sunday. Miss Bennett would like to address the board." "That's not Henry, that's not how we—" "Let her speak, Ansel," Caldwell said. "Good Lord, let the woman speak." And Clara understood, standing on that rug, that he had just done it again. He had just been generous, in front of 4 men. He'd let her in, and now whatever happened next, Henry Caldwell was the man who let her in. She had about 90 seconds, and she knew it. "You're not going to vote," she said. They stirred. "That's the first thing I want said out loud in this room. You're not going to vote because a vote's a piece of paper, and in 30 years somebody could read it." She looked at them one at a time. "You're going to talk, and by supper time, you'll all understand that the board has concerns, and nobody will have said a word, and in August, a woman from Bozeman will get off the stage, and if anybody ever asks any one of you what happened to Clara Bennett, you'll say, well, it was a difficult situation." Silence. "Am I wrong?" Clara said. "Ansel, am I wrong?" Ansel Vance stared at the carpet. That's not fair, Clara." "Then vote." "What?" "Vote." She put both hands on the back of the empty chair. "Right now, on the record, in the book, Miss Clara Bennett is not a suitable teacher for the children of Willow Creek, and every man in this room signs his name under it, and it goes in the minute book, and it sits in that schoolhouse for 50 years. Her voice did not shake. "That's all I want. I'm not asking you to keep me. I've stopped asking anybody in this valley for anything. I'm asking you to sign it." Nobody moved. "Sign it," Clara said. "Miss Bennett, you've all had a winter to decide what I am. 51 days. It's April now, and you've decided. So decide with a pen." She was breathing hard. "Because here's what I've learned, gentlemen, and I learned it up a mountain from a man you'd all cross the street from. They can do anything to you they want, as long as nobody has to sign it. Everything that has ever been done to me in this valley was done with nobody's name on it. Every single thing." She looked at Henry Caldwell. "Except once," she said, and Henry Caldwell's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "It was the smallest thing. Nobody else in that room saw it." Ansel Vance was looking at the carpet, and the Whitfield man was looking at his hands, and Doc's cousin was looking at the window. Clara Bennett saw it. She had spent 51 days learning to read one silent man, and she had gotten very, very good at it. And she watched Henry Caldwell's hand stop in the air for a quarter of a second, and she thought with perfect clarity, "He's afraid of the paper. He's been afraid of the paper for 5 years. That's why he never came back to Montana. That's why he tells people Denver. He doesn't know what's in that box either." The glass came down. "Well," Caldwell said, "that's fine talk. Vote," Clara said. Ansel Caldwell said pleasantly, "I move we table the matter till May." "Table it." "There's no urgency. School's out in 3 weeks anyway." He smiled around the room. "Let's all be men about this. May." And they took it. Every one of them took it gratefully, the way a drowning man takes a rope, and inside of 40 seconds, 4 grown men had agreed to do nothing at all, and been enormously relieved about it. And Clara Bennett stood on that rug and watched it happen, and understood exactly what had just been done to her. He hadn't beaten her. He'd postponed her. 3 more weeks of being talked about. 3 more weeks of there are mothers. And in May, when the road was open, and the Bozeman woman had answered her letter, and nobody was standing in Ruth Abbott's front room crying they'd talk again, and there'd be no drama in it at all, and it would just quietly be over. "Thank you, Clara," Henry Caldwell said warmly, and handed her back the register. "Truly, it took real courage to come here." She took it. She got all the way to the door. And then Clara Bennett turned around and said the only thing she had left, and she said it because she was angry, and she said it because she was tired, and afterward, She was never able to swear it hadn't been on purpose. "Mr. Caldwell, what was the name of the hotel?" The parlor went silent. Caldwell turned. "I beg your pardon. Your hotel, in Montana, before Denver." Clara's heart was going like a hammer. 60% of it. Spring of '81. Henry Caldwell looked at her, and the smile stayed on. That was the horror of it. It stayed on, absolutely fixed, while every other thing in the man's face went somewhere else, and Clara Bennett was suddenly physically afraid for the first time in her entire life. "I've had a number of interests," he said. "One of them had a name." "Miss Bennett?" Caldwell said. "You've had a hard winter." "So did Ellie Marsh," Clara said. She did not know she was going to say it. The name went into that room like a rifle shot, and Clara watched 4 men look up in confusion at a word that meant nothing to them at all, and she watched Henry Caldwell, for one instant, one in his own parlor, in front of his own board, flinch. "Get out of my house," he said. The smile was still on. "Henry," Ansel Vance said, startled. "Now hold on. Get out of my house." And Clara Bennett went out the door and down the path, and made it 40 yards before her legs quit, and she had to sit down on Ruth Abbott's fence rail and put her head between her knees. He knew the name. 4 men in that room didn't know it, and he knew it in a quarter second, and he didn't ask who she was. He didn't ask who she was. Jack Dawson left on the Kelso freight wagon at 6 o'clock Saturday morning. Half the town found a reason to be in the road. They didn't say anything. That was Willow Creek. They never said anything. But Ansel Vance came out of the mercantile and stood there, and Mrs. Pruitt came to her window, and Doc Bailey walked all the way down from his surgery in his slippers, and stood at the tailgate, and handed Jack $4 for a coat he had already taken. "That's robbery, Doc. Shut up and take it." Jack took it. "Son," Doc's hand closed on the tailgate. "Helena, the clerk's office. You'll ask for the territorial files, and some 22-year-old will tell you they're closed to the public, and you'll stand there with your hat and you'll believe him. Don't." He shoved a folded paper into Jack's coat. "That's a letter over my name. I'm a physician of 31 years in this territory, and I've signed 1,000 death certificates that are sitting in that same building, and I've told him you're my agent. It won't get you in. It'll get you to somebody older." Jack looked at the letter in his hand. "Doc, read it," Doc Bailey said. Jack looked up. "Read it out loud, son. Right now, standing in the road." The old man's chin was going. "I want to hear you do it. Once. Before you go." And Jack Dawson unfolded that letter in the middle of Willow Creek at 6 o'clock in the morning, with 15 people watching, and read it out loud, slow word by word, all the way to the bottom. He got to the signature, "Elias Bailey, physician." His voice went, "Doc, your name's Elias. Been Elias 71 years. Nobody ever asks," Doc Bailey said, and his face was wet, and he turned around and walked back up the road in his slippers and did not stop. Clara came last. She came at 10 past 6 because she had not been able to make herself come at 6, and the wagon was already moving, and she walked alongside it. "You'll be in Livingston tonight. Tomorrow noon. And Helena Tuesday. And the clerk's office Wednesday. They ran out of things. "Clara," Jack said, "don't. I've got to say one thing. Don't say it now. You said you'd say it Wednesday." She was walking fast to keep up, and she was not crying, and she had decided about that at 4 in the morning. "You said Helena. You made a whole speech about it in a livery. Jack Dawson, you were very stubborn about it. And I've had 2 days to think about that speech, and I've decided you were right." "No," Clara said. "You were completely wrong, and it was the stupidest thing anybody's ever said to me. But you meant it, and you've had 5 years of people not letting you mean things." She put her hand on the moving tailgate. "So go mean it in Helena, and come back and say it." Jack Dawson looked down at her from the wagon. "And if it's not in the box?" "Then come back and say it anyway," Clara said, "and I'll say yes anyway, and Henry Caldwell can eat the rest of his life." The wagon pulled ahead. She let go. 16 days. That's how long it was. 16 days, and nobody in Willow Creek ever forgot them, and Clara Bennett taught school through every single one, because school did not stop, and neither did she. On day 3, Bo Turner quit. He walked into Henry Caldwell's office and put his keys on the desk and said he was through, and Caldwell. This is what Turner told Doc, and Doc believed him. Caldwell didn't get angry at all. He asked him to sit down. He poured 2 glasses, and he said kindly, "Bo, what did the paper say?" And Bo Turner said, "I don't know, Mr. Caldwell. Do you?" And Henry Caldwell smiled at him for a long, long moment and said, "You're going to want that job back by August." On day 7, Mrs. Pruitt stood up in the mercantile. Nobody had asked her to. She was buying thread. And Emmett Vance's wife said something about the cabin. Nothing much. Nothing. Anybody would remember the kind of thing that had been said in that store 400 times since December. And Ellen Pruitt put the thread down on the counter and said, "Say her name." The store went quiet. "What? You said her. Say her name. Say Clara Bennett." Ellen Pruitt's voice was shaking so hard she could barely get it out. "Because my boy couldn't read his own name in April, and he read me a page out of the Bible on Tuesday night, and that woman did that for free at 7 o'clock at night after teaching all day. And if you're going to say a thing about her, you're going to say her name while you do it." Nobody in that store said one word. Ellen Pruitt picked up her thread and paid for it and walked out, and Ruth Abbott, who was standing 3 feet away, said afterward that it was the best thing she ever saw in her life. On day 11, the county sent a man about the bridge. He looked at it for an hour and said the north footing had lifted in the thaw, and it wanted 6 weeks and about $400, and until then, no wagon over a ton and no cattle, and everybody nodded and nobody did anything because it was April, and the drive was in 3 weeks, and $400 was $400. Henry Caldwell was at that inspection. He nodded too. On day 16, at 4 in the afternoon, Henry Caldwell put 1,100 head of cattle and 9 men on the Willow Creek Bridge, because the railhead price had jumped 40 cents in Livingston, and he was not going to wait 6 weeks. And Clara Bennett was standing in the schoolhouse door with 31 children behind her when she heard it go. She didn't hear it exactly. Nobody in Willow Creek ever described it as hearing. Sam Pruitt said it was like the whole valley cleared its throat. Clara Bennett had 31 children in that room, and she had them out of it in 90 seconds. And afterward, not one of those children could tell you how, because she never raised her voice once. She just started saying names. That was all. Sam, Mary Vance, Eli. Take the little ones, take hands. Go to Ruth Abbott's kitchen and sit down on the floor and don't move. Names one at a time in the voice she used for spelling. Miss Bennett is at the bridge. Sam. Is my daddy? Sam Pruitt. She got down and took him by both arms. Your daddy's in the north field and you know it. Now you are 9 years old and you're the biggest one I've got. Count them at Ruth's door. Out loud. All 30. If you get 29, you come find me and you tell me which one. Yes, ma'am. Say it back. Count 'em out loud. 29, I come find you. Go. And Clara Bennett picked up her skirt in both hands and ran for the second time in her adult life. She got there in 4 minutes, and what she found was 40 grown men doing absolutely nothing at all. That was the thing. She'd expected chaos. What she got was a crowd standing on the bank in a kind of horrible politeness, everybody looking at everybody, everybody waiting for somebody, and out on what was left of that bridge, there were 3 men in the water and 1 man under the footing, and 1,100 head of cattle boiling on the far bank, with 9 riders in among them, and no way across. How many? Clara said. Nobody answered her. How many men are in the water? 3, Ansel Vance said. He was gray. 3 in, and Elias Kelso's boy is under the north footing. He's Clara. He's under it, the whole thing come down on him, and he's hollering, you can hear him. She could hear him. Then why is nobody moving? Clara said. And Ansel Vance said the thing that Willow Creek carried in its chest for the next 50 years. He said, Mr. Caldwell says wait. Clara turned around. Henry Caldwell was standing on the bank with his hat in his hand. Clara, he said warmly, this isn't... Say it again. Ma'am, there's $400 of county engineering. Say it again, Henry. And Henry Caldwell, who had never in his life been at the bottom of a thing he did not control, who had spent 5 years, never once being in a room where somebody made him answer, looked around at 40 of his neighbors and made the only real mistake he ever made. The herd's coming across, he said. That's the situation. You put men on that span now and the herd goes into 'em, and then it's 40 dead instead of 4. We hold the crowd back. We work the cattle down to the ford, and then we go in. That's not cruelty, Miss Bennett. That's arithmetic. Clara Bennett looked at him for 1 full second. The ford's 2 miles, she said. It's the only 2 miles down and 2 miles back is 2 hours, and that boy is under a footing. Her voice came off that bank like a bell, and every person there heard it. You're not moving the herd to save the men, Henry. You're keeping the men off the bridge to save the herd. That's an ugly way to put it. It's the true way to put it, Clara said. Somebody made a sound. Ruth Abbott later said, that was the moment, not what came after. Not any of it. That was the moment the valley turned, and it wasn't a shout. It was one woman on a riverbank saying a rich man's own sentence back to him in his own words. Ansel, Clara said, not looking away from Caldwell. Who's the biggest man here? Ma'am. Who is the biggest man here? Amos Abbott, I guess. Amos get every rope in this valley. Every rope, every trace chain, every lead line. And if a man tells you no, you take it out of his hands. Ellen Pruitt. Ellen, I can see you get up here, boil water, and get every blanket in this town onto this bank, and get the Vance girls doing it. Don't do it yourself, you organize it. Doc. Here. How long has he got under that footing? Doc Bailey looked at the bridge and his old face did something terrible. 20 minutes, he said. Maybe. He's not hollering as loud as he was 10 minutes ago, and that's not a good sign, girl. That's the worst sign there is. Then we go now. Miss Bennett, Caldwell said. You are not the... I am the only person on this bank who has said a verb, Clara said. And Bo Turner walked out of the crowd. He'd been standing at the back. He had no job and no keys and no horse of his own, and he walked past Henry Caldwell without one word, and he sat down in the mud and pulled his boots off. Bo, Caldwell said. Turner didn't look at him. Bo, you get back here. Turner stood up in his socks and took the first coil of rope out of Amos Abbott's arms. Robert Turner, Henry Caldwell said, and his voice had changed. Clara heard it change, and it was the first time she had ever heard the man sound like anything at all. You are 46 years old, and you have no place to sleep tonight, and no wages coming, and if you put 1 foot on that span, I will not... Bo Turner turned around. Mr. Caldwell, he said, I've done everything you ever told me, and I'd like to see what the other thing feels like. He went in. The next 40 minutes, Willow Creek never got straight. Everybody who was there told it different, and everybody was lying a little, not on purpose, because that's what happens. But the parts they all agreed on were these. Bo Turner got a rope on the first man in the water, and Amos Abbott's brother-in-law took him out on a horse, and that man lived. Bo Turner went back in for the second one, and lost him, and got him again 40 yards down, and that man lived, and never walked right after. Bo Turner went in a third time and did not come up for so long that Ruth Abbott screamed, and when he came up, he had the third man's collar in his teeth because both his hands were full of the rope, and that man lived. And then Bo Turner crawled up onto the broken span with his socks torn off his feet and got to the north footing and got his hands under it and could not move it. He could not move it 1 inch, and he lay down on that timber and put his face against it and hollered down into the dark. Boy, you hear me. Don't you go to sleep. Don't you dare. I'm right here. And 40 people on the bank listened to a man they had all despised for 4 years talk to a 19-year-old under a footing, and Doc Bailey took his hat off and stood there holding it. It wants 6 men, Amos said. It wants 12, Doc said. Then get 12, Clara said. And they didn't come. That's the part. That's the part Clara Bennett could not forgive for the rest of her life and never once pretended she could. She stood on that bank and said, "Get 12," and there were 60 men in earshot. And they looked at the mud, every one of them, because Henry Caldwell was standing 11 feet away, with his hat in his hand, and every man there had a lease or a note or a job or a brother with one. Ansel Vance took one step forward, and his wife caught his arm. "Ansel. Ellen, that's the Kelso." "Ansel." And Ansel Vance stopped. Clara heard herself laugh. It was the worst sound she ever made. "Well," she said. "There's the mothers, Henry. There they are. You found them." Henry Caldwell did not answer because Henry Caldwell was looking down the road. There was a wagon on the road. It was the Kelso freight wagon, and it was coming at a gallop, which no freight wagon in the history of Montana Territory had ever done. And the Kelso boys were standing up on the box and hollering, and there was a man on the tailgate. He came off it before it stopped. He hit the ground running, and he came through that crowd like the crowd wasn't there, and he did not look at Clara Bennett, and he did not look at Henry Caldwell, and he got to the water's edge and shucked his coat and said one word to Amos Abbott. "Chains." "Jack." "Chains, Amos. Not rope. Rope stretches. Get me every trace chain in this valley and get 'em to me in 90 seconds, and after that, I don't care what you do." And Willow Creek, Montana, a town that had crossed the street from Jack Dawson for 4 years, moved. Clara never understood it. She thought about it for 40 years and never understood it, and Doc Bailey said the only true thing anybody ever said about it, which was they'd been waiting for somebody to tell them to. That's all it ever was, girl. 60 men standing in the mud waiting for one man to say a word out loud, so they didn't have to be the first one. He got out on the span with Bo Turner, the two of them. Nobody had planned that, and nobody in that valley ever got over it. "Dawson?" "Bo." "He's under the west corner. I can't shift it. I've had my hands." "You're lifting the wrong end." Jack was already down flat. "You lift here? You're lifting the whole deck. Look at it. Look at where the strain runs, Bo. It's all going through that one timber. You don't lift the bridge. You lift the timber." "I can't read a bridge, Jack." "Then hold the chain and I'll read it," Jack Dawson said. And Bo Turner made a sound and did what he was told. It took 9 minutes and 11 men. It took Amos Abbott and his brother-in-law and Ansel Vance, who came out on that span on his hands and knees with his wife screaming his name behind him and never once looked back, and who was from that day to the day he died a completely different man. It took the Kelso boys who were pulling their own brother out. And at the end of it, it took Doc Bailey, 71 years old, crawling out on a broken span in his slippers to get his hands on a boy's chest because the boy came out and he was blue. He's not breathing. "Get back. All of you, get back. Doc, give me room." 90 seconds. 90 seconds that Willow Creek stood on that bank in total silence. Then Elias Kelso's boy coughed half the Willow Creek River onto Doc Bailey's nightshirt and started to cry. And that bank came apart. Grown men sat down in the mud. Ruth Abbott had her apron over her face. Ellen Pruitt was holding on to Ansel Vance's wife, and both of them were sobbing, and neither of them could have told you why exactly. And somewhere in it all, Amos Abbott started laughing and couldn't stop. Clara Bennett stood absolutely still. She was looking at the span, because Jack Dawson had not gotten up. He was on his knees on that timber, with his hands still on the chain, and his head was down, and he wasn't moving at all. She was out on it before anybody could stop her. "Jack, I'm all right." "You're not, Clara." He got his head up. His hands were shredded. There was chain black to his elbows, and he was shaking so hard the timber was moving under her. "Clara, I'm all right. Look at me. I'm all right." And then his face came apart in front of her, all of it, everything, and he said, "It's in the box." Clara stopped breathing. "What?" "It's in the box," Jack Dawson said. It was in the box, Clara. It's been in a box in Helena for 5 years. She got both hands on his face. "Jack Dawson, do not you dare say another word until I have got you off this bridge." "Clara." "Off the bridge." They got him off the bridge. He wouldn't go to Doc's. He wouldn't go to Ruth's. He stood on that bank with the whole town around him, and his hands wrapped in Ellen Pruitt's petticoat, and he said, "Where's Caldwell?" And 40 people turned around. Henry Caldwell was walking to his horse. "Henry," Doc Bailey said. He kept walking. "Henry Caldwell." He got a foot in the stirrup, and Ansel Vance, mud to the shoulders, hands bleeding, 40 years old and brand new, put his hand on the bridle. "Get off the horse, Henry." "Ansel." "You said wait." Ansel Vance's voice cracked wide open. "You stood on that bank and you said wait, and I did. I stood there. My wife had my arm and I stood there, and that boy was hollering, and I've got to go home tonight and live in my own house." His hand was shaking on the bridle, and it did not come off. "Get off the horse." Henry Caldwell looked around, and Clara Bennett watched it happen, watched a man do the arithmetic he'd been doing his whole life, watched him count the room, the way he'd counted the church hall in December, and watched the number come out wrong for the first time. There was nobody looking at the mud. 60 people. Not one of them looking at the mud. "Well," Caldwell said, and he was still smiling, and he would be smiling at the end. "Say your piece, Dawson. You've clearly rehearsed." "No, sir," Jack said. "I never rehearsed anything in my life. That's been my whole trouble." He reached inside his coat. "Pastor," he said, "open the church." They filled it. Every soul in that valley, mud and all, and they put the Kelso boy on a bench in the back, wrapped in 11 blankets, with his mother holding him, and Doc Bailey stood in the aisle because he wouldn't sit down, and Bo Turner stood at the back of the church in his socks in the exact spot Jack Dawson had stood for 4 years. And Jack came up the aisle and stood where Henry Caldwell had stood in December and put 2 pieces of paper on the table. "I can't read fast," he said. Nobody said anything. I want that said first because there's people in this room who are going to say afterward that somebody put me up to this or that, I've got a grudge, or that I'm a drifter from 2 rivers. His voice was perfectly steady. "So I'm going to read these out loud myself, slow, and you can all sit there and watch me do it, and it's going to be slow, and I'd take it kindly if nobody helped me." Clara Bennett put her hand over her mouth and kept it there for the next 11 minutes. The first one, Jack said, is a statement. It's dated the 21st of November, 1881, 9 o'clock in the morning at the sheriff's office in 2 Rivers, Montana Territory. It's signed at the bottom by Henry M. Caldwell. The church went so quiet, Clara could hear the Kelso boy's teeth. It says... Jack put his finger on the line. He did not look up. "It says I saw the man Dawson at the rear of the Marsh House on Thursday evening last at or about 9 o'clock in the alley behind the kitchen door, where he had no cause to be. I have seen him there before. I mention it now only because of what has since occurred." He stopped. "That's the whole thing," Jack said. 2 lines. 2 lines on a Monday morning, and I did 11 days for him, and there's not a word in it that isn't true." The town stirred. "It's true," Jack said again. "I want that plain. I was in that alley Thursday night at 9 o'clock. He saw me. He wrote it down. Every word of that is God's own truth." Ansel Vance said, "Then what in the—" "Ellie Marsh was found on Sunday morning," Jack Dawson said. "The church didn't move. Sunday morning, 2 miles down in the shallows past the mill. And nobody in that town knew when she'd gone in the water. Nobody. There was talk she'd run off Friday. There was talk she'd been seen Saturday at her aunt's. The doctor didn't file his report until Monday afternoon. I've got the copy of it. It's the second paper on this table. It's stamped, and it's dated 4:15 in the afternoon on Monday the 21st of November. And that's the first minute in the history of the world that anybody in 2 Rivers, Montana knew that girl died on a Thursday." He looked up. Henry Caldwell wrote it down at 9 o'clock that morning. Somebody in the 3rd row said, "Oh dear God." 7 hours early, Jack said. Clara Bennett's legs went. Ruth Abbott caught her. "Now, I'm not a lawyer," Jack said. "I'm a man who chops wood, and I've had 5 years to think of a way it's innocent, and I've thought of about 9, and here they are." He counted them off on his ruined hands, flat patient, the way he'd counted 3 bribes at a plank table in a cabin. He guessed. He heard talk. He got the day wrong by accident, and it happened to come out right. He'd seen me there other Thursdays, and he mixed 'em up. He put his hands down. I've lived with every one of those for 5 years, and I'd have taken any of them. I wanted one of them, because you all need to understand something about me, and then I'll be done. His voice finally went. I didn't want it to be him, Jack Dawson said. I wanted it to be a stranger. I wanted it to be a drifter out of the dark like they all said it was, because if it's a stranger, then it's just the world being the world. But if it's the man who bought 60% of her granddaddy's hotel, and then sat in a lobby and watched her walk out that door, then somebody who shook her hand did it. And I couldn't carry that. So for 5 years I made myself 9 reasons. He looked out at them. And then in April, a schoolteacher asked me a question in a cabin, he said, and I found out I'd been lying to myself worse than any of you ever lied about me. Nobody breathed. Read the other one, Doc Bailey said hoarsely. Jack looked at the second paper for a long moment. This one's not evidence, he said. This one's just mine. But there's a man standing at the back of this church who's got a right to hear it, and he's had 4 years of not knowing, and I'm not letting him have 4 more. Bo Turner made a small sound. On the 9th day they brought a paper into my cell, Jack said. Deputy Turner brought it. He told me it was a statement of my whereabouts. He told me to sign it, and I could go home. He looked at the back of the church. He believed that, and I want every soul in this room to hear me say it. He believed that, because he couldn't read it either, and the man who sent him in knew it. 200 faces turned around and looked at Bo Turner standing in his socks. I didn't sign it, Jack said. Not because I was brave. I want that plain too. I didn't sign it because I couldn't read it, and I was too proud to say so in front of a man with a badge. That's all. That's the entire reason. I was ashamed, and shame kept me in that cell 2 extra days, and I have hated myself for those 2 days every single night for 5 years. He picked up the paper. His hand was shaking. It's in the file, he said. Unsigned. Nobody ever looked at it because the only 2 men who ever held it couldn't read a word of it, and everybody else had a hotel to think about. He turned it over. It says, I, John Dawson, being of sound mind, do hereby confess that on the night of Thursday last, I did meet Miss Ellen Marsh in the alley behind the Marsh house, and that in the course of a quarrel, I did... He stopped. The church made a sound that Clara Bennett heard in her sleep for the rest of her life. That's as far as I read, Jack said. In Helena. I stood at a clerk's counter and got that far, and I couldn't do the rest, and a 22-year-old boy had to bring me a chair. Bo Turner had gone down on one knee at the back of the church. It's a confession, Jack said. They put a confession in front of me, and told me it was a statement of my whereabouts, and if I could have read 1 word of it, I'd have known, and if I couldn't read it, and hadn't been too proud to say so. His voice broke all the way open. Then some kind soul would have read it to me and told me what it said, and I'd have said that's not true, and they'd have said sign it anyway, son, and go home. He put his hand flat on the table to hold himself up. I was going to hang, Jack Dawson said. I was 9 days from hanging, and the only thing on God's earth that saved my life was that I was too ashamed to admit I couldn't read. Nobody in Willow Creek moved. That's what I've been carrying, he said. That's the thing. Not the cell, not the street. Every man in this room's got something he's ashamed of, and he thinks it's the worst thing about him. And mine kept me alive, and I didn't find that out for 5 years, and I only found it out because a woman I'd never spoken to sat down at a table and taught me BREAD. Clara Bennett was crying so hard, Ruth Abbott had both arms around her. Jack Dawson looked up. Henry, he said. And Henry Caldwell, standing in the aisle of the Willow Creek Church with mud on his good boots and 200 people between him and the door, smiled. That's a fine story, he said. It's not a story, Jack said. That's the whole point of a piece of paper, Henry. That's why you've spent 5 years telling people Denver. Because a story you can talk over. You can stand in a road and laugh and clap a man on the shoulder and turn it into a joke, and by supper, it's gone. He tapped the table. You can't laugh at a date. There's an explanation. Then give it, Jack said. Right here, in front of everybody, same as you made me stand in the road on Tuesday. 9 o'clock Monday morning, 7 hours before the doctor. How did you know it was Thursday? Henry Caldwell opened his mouth. And Clara Bennett, who had learned to read One Silent Man in a Cabin and had gotten so good at it that she could read anybody, now watched the most careful man in Montana Territory take 4 full seconds to answer in front of his entire town. 4 seconds. 200 people counted them. "I don't have to stand here," Caldwell said. "No, sir," Jack said. "You don't. Nobody in this valley's ever had to stand anywhere. That's been the whole trouble with the place." Caldwell turned for the door, and the door was full of people, and not one of them moved out of the way. That was all. Nobody grabbed him. Nobody laid a hand on Henry Caldwell. Willow Creek was very proud of that afterward, and they were right to be. They just stood in the door, 60 of them in the mud in the church, and Henry Caldwell walked up to that wall of his own neighbors and stopped, and for the first time in 5 years, the man had to look at people. "Let me by," he said. Nobody said anything. "I gave this town its water," Henry Caldwell said, and his voice went up. And there it was. Everybody heard it. The thing under the smile, the sound Clara had been waiting 8 months to hear. "I gave you the pump and the church roof, and half of you have got paper with my name on it in a drawer, and you are going to stand in a door." "Say her name, Henry," Ellen Pruitt said. The church went dead silent. "What? Say her name." Ellen Pruitt was not a brave woman. She had a lifetime of not being one. She stood up in that pew with her chin going and her hands white on the back of the bench in front of her. "That girl, in the hotel. You've said her hotel and her river and her town. Say her name out loud and I'll move." Henry Caldwell looked at her. And he didn't. He couldn't. Clara Bennett watched a man stand in a church and be physically unable to say a 19-year-old girl's name, and that was the end of Henry Caldwell in the Willow Creek Valley. Not the paper, not the date, not the marshal who came out from Helena 11 days later. That. 60 people watched him not be able to do it. "Ellie Marsh," Jack Dawson said from the front, and 200 people turned back around. Her name was Ellie Marsh. She was 19. She ran that hotel from the time she was 15 because her daddy couldn't. She hummed all day and it drove the cook out of his mind, and she couldn't ride a horse to save her life, and she fell off every one she ever got on and got right back up laughing. His voice was completely steady. "She said good morning to me like she meant it. That's all she ever did to anybody. And this valley's going to hear that name for the next 100 years, and you are the only man in it who can't say it." Henry Caldwell walked out through that door because they let him finally at Doc Bailey's word, and he rode out of Willow Creek that night, and 11 days later, a territorial marshal took him off a train in Butte with $2,000 in a valise and a ticket to Portland, Oregon. He never came back to this valley. It took 2 years. 2 years of Helena. 2 years of a dead sheriff and a burned office and a lawyer from Denver who was very good. And in the end, they never hanged Henry Caldwell for Ellie Marsh, and Clara Bennett had to make her peace with that. And it took her a long time. They got him on the paper. That was the part nobody expected. Ellie Marsh had been asking about the books, and Ellie Marsh had been right. 60% of a hotel bought with money that came out of a bank in Cheyenne that had a different name on the note, and once the territory started pulling that thread, it came apart in about 9 months. 11 years. He served 9 and died in the 4th year of the century in a rented room in Portland, Oregon, and there was nobody at the funeral. Jack Dawson never once called that justice. "They didn't get him for her," he said one night years later when Clara asked. "They got him for money. Nobody ever gets got for the girl, Clara. They get got for the money. That's the world." Then was it worth it? And Jack thought about it a long time. He had to stand in a door, he said, in front of everybody, and he couldn't say her name. He shook his head slowly. "That's what I got. $50.40 and no horse, and I bought 4 seconds of a man not being able to say her name in front of his own town. And I'd pay it again tomorrow." There was no board meeting in May. There was no board meeting ever again about the suitability of Miss Clara Bennett, and no woman from Bozeman got off the stage in August. And when Ansel Vance came to Ruth Abbott's door in his good coat to say so, he couldn't get the words out, and had to write them on the back of a feed bill and hand it to her, and Clara kept that feed bill in her Bible until the day she died. "There's a thing I want to say," Ansel said finally in the doorway. "And I've been standing on this step for 10 minutes and I can't make it come out." "Then don't." "No, His face was working. "Clara, I want to say I want to say I didn't, and it's not true. Every version of it I try, it's a lie. And I've watched this whole valley spend 8 months telling itself the version where it didn't do anything, and I'm not going to be that. So I'm just going to say the true one." He looked her in the eye, and it cost him everything he had. "I sat in that church in December, and I let a man read your name off a list, and I looked at the floor. And I stood on that bank and let my wife take my arm. Clara didn't say it was all right." That was the thing about Clara Bennett that Willow Creek learned that year and never forgot. She wouldn't say it was all right. She never once said it to any of them. "I know you did, Ansel," she said. And that was all, and he cried on Ruth Abbott's step, and then he went and put $400 of his own money into that bridge and never told a soul. And Clara knew because she read the county ledger, because she read everything now. They were married in the spring. Not that spring, the next one a year and a half after the bridge, because Jack Dawson was in Helena 11 times over those 2 years, and Clara Bennett had 31 children, and neither of them was in a hurry about anything. Ruth Abbott stood up with her. Doc Bailey gave her away 73 years old, and in a collar so tight, Amos Abbott said he looked like a thumb, and when Pastor Whitfield asked, "Who gives this woman, Doc?" said, "Nobody. She's not anybody's to give, but I'll walk with her." And Ruth Abbott had to be helped out of the church. Bo Turner stood up with Jack. They'd argued about it for 2 months. Turner had said no 11 times. He said it was obscene. He said the whole valley would look at him. He said, "Jack, I put the irons on you." And Jack Dawson said, "I know it. And then you got in the river 3 times in your socks." "Bo, you're the only man in Montana who's ever done both, and I'm not standing up there next to somebody who's only ever done one." Bo Turner wore borrowed boots and cried through the entire ceremony, and nobody ever mentioned it. Sam Pruitt read the lesson. 9 years old, and Clara Bennett had taught him his letters twice, and he got through it without one mistake, and his mother had her hand over her mouth the whole time. And when it was over, and the whole valley was in that churchyard, Jack Dawson took his wife's hand and said, "Quiet," so nobody else heard it. They tried to decide our story before they knew us, and Clara said, "Yes," and then we wrote it down. The cabin became a school. That was Clara's entirely. 8 miles up on the north shoulder, where the ranch children from the high valleys couldn't get down in the winter and had never had 1 day of schooling in their lives, and Clara Bennett rode up there 3 days a week for 19 years and taught them, and Jack built the second room himself, and then a third, and then a porch because he could not stop. They put a board over the door. It says, "The Marsh School." For 50 years, children in that valley have asked who Marsh was, and for 50 years, every teacher in that building has answered the same way, because Clara Bennett wrote the answer in the front of the register in her own hand in 1887, and every teacher since has copied it out. Ellen Marsh of Two Rivers, Montana. She was 19. She hummed all day off key, and it drove the cook out of his mind. She could not ride a horse. She said good morning to a stranger like she meant it, and a whole valley was changed by it 800 miles away 4 years later, and she never knew. Say her name out loud when you read this. That's the whole lesson. Jack Dawson learned to read. Not quick. He was slow at it his whole life, and it never stopped being work, and he read every night at that same plank table for 41 years out loud badly, and Clara never once corrected him unless he asked. In 1911, the county put a plaque on the bridge for the men who went in the water, and there are 11 names on it, and Jack Dawson's is one, and Robert Turner's is one, and Ansel Vance's is one, and when they unveiled it, they asked Jack to read it out. He was 60. He stood up in front of the whole valley and read 11 names off a bronze plate, slow one at a time. It took him a minute and a half. Nobody helped him. And afterward, an old woman named Ellen Pruitt, who was there, told her granddaughter that it was the finest thing she ever saw a man do, and the granddaughter said, "Reading. He just read it." And Ellen Pruitt said, "Child, You had to have been in that church. Clara Bennett died in 1934, 87 days after her husband, in a house they'd built themselves in a valley that had named a school for a girl she never met. There were 400 people at the funeral. They came down out of the high ranches, 2 and 3 generations of them people who'd learned their letters in a one-room line cabin 8 miles up a mountain from a woman who'd been carried up there against her will because nobody wanted her. And Sam Pruitt, who was 56 years old and had been the county school superintendent for 11 years, stood up in the same church where a man once read her name off a list and said the only thing that needed saying, they called her the woman nobody wanted. He looked out at 400 people. "Count us," he said. "Because that's the truth. This valley bought with one bad winter, and it cost everything it had, and it was worth it." The people who decide what you are have never once had to sign their names to it, but the people who know you will sign theirs in bronze, in ledgers, in a school register, in a boy's whole life, in a name over a door. Clara Bennett was never the woman nobody wanted. She was the woman nobody had bothered to look at. And the day one man finally did one silent, stubborn, half-ruined cowboy standing in the back of a church for 200 Sundays, that was the day Willow Creek started becoming a town worth living in.